I will just say welcome to meeting number 33 of the Planning and Housing Committee. I'd like to acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence ont enrichi et continuent d'enrichir ces terres. May I get a roll call, please?
Councillor Brockington. Councillor Curry.
Present.
Councillor Dudas. Councillor Johnson.
Here.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Lowe.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Vice Chair Gower.
Here.
Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you very much. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 4.2 to 4.6 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those specifically identified in the Planning Act who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if Council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of the receipt of an application for zoning bylaw and 120 days for an official plan amendment to submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on September the 18th, 2024. Please email or call the committee or council coordinator. Are there any declarations of interest? Nope. Are the minutes of our meeting number 32, August 28th, 2024 confirmed?
Confirmed.
Thank you very much. I'll run through the agenda. We're going to deal with various technical motions and such as we go through, if that's okay with the committee, rather than hold items. I think we'll be mostly focused this morning on, I think, the 185, 109, and the Hazeldean, of course. So the demolition control bylaw amendment. Thank you very much to the committee for giving us a bit of a pause for a few weeks over the summer to get the community and builders on board. There is a technical motion on that, Vice Chair Gower.
Thanks, Chair. Whereas the report demolition control bylaw amendment was deferred from the July 3rd Planning and Housing Committee meeting in order to allow for further consultation with the community and councillors, and whereas a report deferred from a committee is meant to return as the same report without changes, and whereas as a result of the further consultation, two aspects of the report required updating. One, additional reference to small parts of wards 7 and 16 on the cover page and throughout the report. And two, in document 171D, a reference to the provision of required securities for site plan control was added. Therefore, be it resolved, the updated report be listed as item 4.1 on the Planning and Housing Committee Agenda 33.
Is that amendment adopted? Carried? Thank you. And is the bylaw carried? Thank you. Moving on. Obviously, we're going to hold the item at 6310 and 6320 Hazeldean Road. The official plan amendment for the Canada North Economic District. There's both a technical motion and a motion. I'll ask for Vice Chair Gower to make the technical motion.
Whereas the report does not include the standard recommendation regarding written notice following Council's adoption of an official plan amendment pursuant to subsections 1723 and 23.1 of the Planning Act 1990. And whereas subsection 1723.2 requires that such written notice include a brief explanation of the effect, if any, that written submissions received before Council made its decision and oral submissions made at the public meeting had on its decision. Therefore, be it resolved that the following be added as recommendation 3 of the report, and it is displayed on the screen.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Kerr, did you have a motion on this one?
I do, and I just need it up on the screen. All right, whereas the subject report includes the approval of the Canada North Economic District KNED Urban Design Guidelines, whereas the KNED Urban Design Guidelines are an important tool in the establishment of new parameters for both built form and the public realm within the district, whereas the Urban Design Guidelines include specific directions direction associated with the built form for low, mid, and high-rise buildings, whereas the KNED urban design guidelines provide guidance related to high-rise tower separation in the district. Whereas high-rise tower separation is an important consideration for livability, including shadowing, privacy, wind impacts, and overall impacts on the public realm. Whereas to meet the aforementioned policy objectives, the council-approved high-rise design guidelines require a tower separation of 23 meters for high-rise buildings up to 30 stories and 25 meters above 30 stories in all suburban transects. Whereas the context associated with the district and the desire to achieve adequate tower separation for the aforementioned reasons has been further reviewed since report publication, and staff have determined that a minimum separation distance of 23 meters should be maintained so that this is consistent with the approach in all suburban transects. Whereas the draft KNED urban design guidelines also include direction regarding the delivery of an improved public realm, including the provision of active and green rights of way, which may require refinement following further internal city operations review. Therefore, be it resolved that sections 3.7.5C, 3.7.5D, and figure 3.6 of the draft urban design guidelines be deleted as they reference tower separations that are less than 23 meters. And be it further resolved that staff in the Planning, Development, and Building Services Department be directed to prepare for consideration by council amendments to the right-of-way cross-sections in sections 4.8 as required to ensure trees, utility services, active transportation considerations, and operational considerations that have been adequately addressed before the cross-sections are published for use.
Thank you very much, Councillor Curry. Any discussion on Curry motion? None. Is the Curry amendment carried?
Carried.
Is the technical motion carried?
Carried.
And are the recommendations of the report as amended carried?
Carried.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Councillor Curry, and thank you very much to staff for what I know is a lot of work on that one. There's a zoning bylaw amendment at 246 West Haven Crescent, number 44. We don't have any delegations. There's a bit of correspondence. Did anyone want that item held? Is that item carried? Thank you. Oh, the applicants are, if the, we've already carried it, but I take it, Susan, do you need to speak to this if we're prepared to carry the item, which clearly we are? Okay, yeah, we'll move on. The item at 3484 Innes Road, 24270 La Marche. We don't have any delegations, but Councillor Kitts has asked for the floor for a brief bit.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the committee's indulgence as I make a few comments. I don't want to hold this item up, but this application does have a long and controversial history in the community. It's been in front of us a number of times. I want to note we did have several submissions and over 200 comments through the public consultation process. I do know that there is concern from abutting residents about the height of the building and buildings. And I do want to note that based on feedback, the height of the building was reduced, and the design includes significant setbacks to respond to concerns from existing residential. I do appreciate that there is still dissatisfaction within the community, but I did want to note that there has been changes made to the application since it was first before us. I continue to be concerned about the impact on traffic. There are 7 projects within the TIA radius. 6 of them are specific to the area with over 1,290 units. And one is the EUC CDP that has 2,040 potential units. So more than 1,300 new homes that will use Innes and La Marche that are, being built. And those that are exiting La Marche must cross several lanes of Innes Road, which is operating over capacity with no control. But the TIA says the signalization isn't warranted until 2031, which just does not make sense to me. But I wanted to note that because at this committee, I speak about the traffic issues in Ward 19 constantly. And I think that TIAs like this are contributing to the collapse of the transportation network in Ward 19. We were recently made aware that the signalization of this intersection that was planned for last year and was delayed to this year will now not begin construction until the spring, despite several follow-ups on my end to ensure that we wouldn't miss another construction season. So, and I promise I'm wrapping up here, but I do want to acknowledge that Lapine was the one that made me aware of the delays. And I would like staff to explain to the community why the signalization is further delayed, and what assurance can you give that this will be constructed as quickly as possible and before construction on this development begins?
Chair, the delays for the construction of the intersection were due to an attempt to accommodate a development that was taking place across the street and ensuring that the intersection would be future-proofed with ductwork to accommodate that other development. The front-ending agreement has been before committee and council for approval, and the developer of the LaMarche development has agreed to enter into that. That agreement has not yet been finalized, but I understand, and they do have representation here today, but I understand they are working towards starting construction in May, provided that the rest of their approvals come together and line up.
Okay, thank you for that. I will leave it there. This file, as I said, has been in front of us a number of times, so I will remain consistent, and I just would like to register my dissent. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dudas, did you have a quick comment as well? Oh. Okay. Their staff are prepared to make a presentation. The applicants, representatives of the applicants are here. To members, representatives of the applicants, if the committee is prepared to carry this, did you still wish to speak? Thank you. So is this item carried? Noting dissents from Councillor Dudas and Councillor Kitts. Thank you. We have the item at 1770 Hetherington Road, a Good News Affordable Housing story. Staff have a presentation that I'm not asking them to make unless people want to hear it. The applicant is the City of Ottawa, so we know they're good with it. Did anyone want this presentation held? No. Is the item carried? Thank you very much to staff, Lauren and Aaron, for working on that. The community benefits charge bylaw update. We know we have Goba in the room who don't need to speak unless we hold the item. I don't think we need to hold the item. I do have a direction that I'd like to ask staff to undertake, though. So as a direction to staff, would you be willing to commit that staff be directed to provide the ward councillor notification of an applicant's intent to provide an in-kind contribution in lieu of a community benefits charge cash payment, and obtain final approval from the ward councillor on any in-kind CBC contributions prior to the issuance of a building permit?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you very much. Is this item carried? Thank you. The Bill 185 implementation with respect to development review, Bill 109. We do have public delegations and a presentation on that one, so we'll be holding it. Royce is going to be here for the entire meeting, eh? You know what? I'm just going to jump through to the IPD, the new zoning bylaw review status update. I do have a question for staff on that. There's been some assertion in the community, or a perception in the community, that the what we heard section of that IPD is actually something we're voting on and implementing today. Can you just clarify that we are not voting on any zoning changes today?
Sure, that's correct. The IPD is just to provide an update on public feedback heard so far from public consultation in draft 1. It identifies 4 key items from that consultation, and just a heads up of some options that staff are considering in moving those options forward. Recommendations on approaches to look at those options or those items we brought forward to committee and council for their consideration in March 2025 as part of draft 2. We are currently halfway through consultation on draft 1, so committee and council can expect another IPD that wraps up what we've heard from that part of the consultation at the end of this year. So there's no recommendations moving forward on draft 1 through the IPD.
Fantastic, thank you. Is that IPD received? Thank you. So we're going to move on to the first held item, which of course is the zoning bylaw amendment at 6310, 6320 Hazel Dean Road. Before we get underway on that, I do know we have a technical motion. I'm wondering if Vice Chair Gower can put that on the table now.
Yeah, a technical amendment, whereas document one in the report includes a holding symbol within the recommended zoning, and staff had advised that the holding symbol should be removed. And whereas staff have revised document one and requested it replace the currently published version, therefore be it resolved that the current version of document one be removed and replaced with the amended version to accurately outline the location and zoning of 6310 and 6320 Hazeldean Road. And be it further resolved that pursuant to subsection 3417 of the Planning Act, no further notice be given.
Thank you very much. We have a presentation clearly from Kimberly and Kirsten. I've given the developer the option to kick or receive, and they're going to follow up after the public delegations. So we'll go to the public delegations as soon as we go in after we hear the presentation. Kimberly, we're in your hands.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of committee. My name is Kimberly Baldwin, and I am here before you today to present the staff recommendation for the zoning bylaw amendment at 6310 and 6320 Hazeldean Road. The subject site, next slide, please. The subject site, excellent, thank you, is on the south side of Hazeldean Road, west of Carp Road, and east of Westridge Drive in the Stittsville community. Next slide, please. The site is irregular in shape with a lot depth ranging between 57 and 98 meters. Surrounding land uses include the Stittsville Corners Retail Plaza to the north and the Timbermere residential community to the northwest across Hazeldean Road. There's an RV dealership immediately east of the site. There's also the Crossing Ridge low-rise residential community immediately to the south. The subject site and the site to the west are currently vacant. Staff also note that there's a row of existing mature trees that line the south perimeter of the site. Next slide, please. As shown on this site plan, the proposal consists of 2 high-rise buildings containing a total of 431 residential units. Building 1, proposed on the western portion of the site, is a 12-story L-shaped bar building, which steps down to 7 stories towards the western property line and 3 stories towards the rear property line. Building 2, proposed on the eastern portion of the site, is a 21-story point tower, which transitions down to 7 stories and 3 stories towards the rear property line. The overall development proposes to include 478 vehicular parking spaces and 446 bicycle parking spaces. There is also a 10-meter wide landscape buffer provided along the rear property line. Next slide, please. In this image, you will see the schedule for the Suburban West Transect. The site is depicted by the yellow star. In the official plan, the site is located within the Suburban Transect and designated Main Street corridor, as shown in purple. Within the Main Street corridor designation, the policies permit high-rise development in cases where the lot fabric can provide a suitable transition to abutting low-rise residential areas. The policies also direct the maximum building height and density closest to the corridor. Next slide, please. This is a slide about transition. A development can demonstrate adequate transition to the low-rise community through a combination of design measures. As shown in the image to the left, a 45-degree angular plane is one tool to measure transition. The angular plane in this case is measured from the rear property line starting at the height of 11 meters, which is the maximum height permitted in the abutting low-rise residential zone. The proposed development falls entirely within the angular plane, except for a triangular portion of the top 1.5 stories, as shown above the red line here. Another way a development can demonstrate transition is by providing adequate setbacks and stepbacks. As shown in the image to the right, the proposed high-rise buildings are set back more than 40 meters from the rear property line. The development also gradually steps down from a high-rise built form, as shown in blue, to a mid-rise or 7 stories as shown in red, and then further down to transitions further down to a low-rise height as shown in orange, which is 3 stories as it approaches the low-rise community. Additionally, the redevelopment will provide a 10-meter green landscape buffer along the rear property line. Next slide, please. The zoning bylaw amendment seeks to retain the existing arterial Main Street zone and amend the existing zone exception to permit high-rise apartment buildings. A site-specific schedule, as shown in the image above, will establish minimum building setbacks, stepbacks, and maximum building heights ranging from 3 stories to 21 stories. The amendment also seeks to reduce the vehicular parking rate and increase the bicycle parking rate on site. Next slide, please. This image shows that the Hazeldean Road is designated as an arterial road in the official plan. As per the mobility policies in the official plan, the city shall require sidewalks along the frontage of new developments that front along arterial roads. As per the policy, the owner of 6310 Hazeldean has agreed to design and construct a sidewalk along the frontage of their site at the time of redevelopment. Next slide, please. Staff also note that there is a city-initiated construction project proposed to include a new sidewalk along the south side of Hazeldean Road, east of the applicant's driveway to the intersection of Carp and Hazeldean Road, as shown in blue here. The property owner for 6310 Hazeldean will be required to design and construct a sidewalk and associated landscaping west of their driveway in accordance with municipal standards. And depending on the timing of the development and progress of the city project, the property owner may also be required to construct a sidewalk east of their driveway up to the easterly property line. In summary, the detailed design of the sidewalk will be determined through the site plan control process. Next slide, please. In summary, staff recommend approval of the application based on the following rationale. The proposal is consistent with the Main Street corridor policies outlined in the official plan. The amendment provides adequate transition to the low-rise community. The proposal also provides 431 housing units that will contribute towards the city's housing supply and diversity of housing available in the community. And finally, a new public sidewalk will be provided along the south side of Hazeldean across the property frontage, improving mobility to and from the site. Next slide, please. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Baldwin. We'll come back to you for questions from members after we've heard from delegations. We'll move right into the public delegations first. Eric Hanna is in the room. Mr. Hanna, we'll get you set up there. Good morning and welcome to committee, Mr. Hanna. When you're ready, you'll have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee, at which point the committee will then have an opportunity to pose questions of you if they choose, and just hit the button on the mic and you're good to go.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to provide my thoughts on the proposed development at 6310 as recommended by city staff. My opinion versus those of the applicant, who describes the key drivers of the urban wall along Hazeldean Road. I, along with many other residents of Stittsville, are not in favor of building a strong urban wall. My 3 areas of focus are implications of being designated as a Main Street corridor, transition requirements, and alignment with other city-approved plans for Stittsville. First of all, with respect to the Main Street corridor, while the entire length of Hazeldean Road has been designated as a Main Street corridor in the official plan, there are currently a variety of built forms along Hazeldean Road. In some places, there are cycling lanes, sidewalks, center medians with lights, and curbs for stormwater management. In addition, portions of Hazeldean Road are designated as transit corridor where it could benefit from transit lanes, passing lanes, and turning features for buses. This is in sharp contrast to the proposed 6310 development on Hazeldean Road from Carp Road west to Westridge. This section lacks several design elements you would expect for a main street corridor. In particular, there are no clearly defined bike lanes, no sidewalks on the south side of the street, limited lighting, no median. A large portion is only 2 lanes. These deficiencies will result in congestion, decreased safety arising from gaps in bicycle and walking modes of transportation. I regret that the report before you recognizes only a small number of these deficiencies and only proposes one risky interim solution related to a portion of the sidewalk deficiencies. The proposed addition of a short section of sidewalk by the developer does nothing to bring the current portion of Hazeldean Road up to features expected in a main street corridor or arterial road. Further, this proposed limited sidewalk to the west would not provide pedestrian access to Westridge, where parks are located along with walking route to schools. The question before the committee is whether to bring the designated portion of the Main Street corridor in the official plan the question before the committee is whether being designated as a Main Street corridor in the official plan immediately permit the building of a proposed high-rise intensity development, or does the road have to be built as a Main Street corridor with sufficient safety features for pedestrians, motorized vehicles, and bicyclists? In the case of Robert Grant High Rise, the city agreed that development of the high rise would not occur until the roadway system was put with appropriate configurations. I urge the committee to commit to the full development of Hazeldean Road from Carp Road to Westridge. Height. The official plan provides for the development of high rises up to 40 stories on Main Street corridors. What is in question is the height of the proposed development. As noted by our councillor, it is anticipated that the tower at 6310 will be the highest tower in all of Stittsville and Canada along Hazeldean Road. In contrasting the 6310 development with the Ontario Land Tribunal decision for Montreal Road and Blair Road Tower, I note the accepted evidence concluded that the site at Montreal Road and Blair was appropriate only if the development provided for, and I quote, opportunities for transit supported development along 2 identified transit priority corridors and within 1.8 kilometers of the operational Blair Street station. The tribunal accepts that the official plan creates equivalency in transit stations and transit priorities for the purposes of locating the areas of greatest height and density. The proposed development at 6310 will not be located on a transit corridor and is not close to any current or proposed transit station. Inclusion with respect to the design of Hazeldean Road as a Main Street corridor and the opportunity for up to 40 stories, I would ask that the committee consider what improvements should be made to Hazeldean Road at city expense prior to development. And given that Main Street corridors have similar characteristics, what other defining characteristics should be used to select a height of 11 to 40 stories? Transition. In the report, the committee and the staff noted here earlier, the proposal provides for suitable transition through generous setbacks and step backs by stipulating highest density and building heights nearest the corridor and by generally adhering to the 45-degree angular plane as measured from the rear property line. It is difficult to see how city staff could have concluded there is, in their words, suitable transition. First, staff note that there are generous setbacks and step backs. I question the word generous. The setbacks proposed are those outlined in various planning guidelines, and in most cases, development does not exceed any of these minimum requirements. In fact, other recent high-rise developments, such as Montreal Road and Blair Road, the developers incorporated larger setbacks and step backs. Staff's use of the words generally adhering to the 45-degree angular plane is not supported by evidence in the report to the committee. I have been assured by our councillor that staff will construct their own angular plane and not rely upon the developer's submission. In my view of the most recent angular plane drawing submitted by the developer presenting a 21-story building, it appears that the building exceeds the 45-degree angular plane by 3 stories. I would ask for greater transparency in city staff's own drawing of their angular plane and clearly articulate the amount of variation in the target height as measured by the angular plane versus the proposed building.
Mr. Hanna, I'm sorry, I'll have to cut you off there. It's 5 minutes, but I believe that your Councillor Glenn, I watch your videos like every week, has a question for you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Eric, and thank you for making the trip to City Hall this morning. I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate, or maybe not devil's advocate, but I want to push you on a couple things. You focus a lot on the transportation, and I want to ask about timing, because you're absolutely right. There's not a clear timeline to upgrade, pardon me, upgrade Hazeldean Road or Carp Road now. It's soon, but, and I'll be asking staff about this later. If we had certainty that there were shovels in the ground today to upgrade Carp Road and the intersection and the sidewalk between this site and Carp Road, would that satisfy your concerns around transportation?
No, with respect, no, Councillor, it would not, because what I'm concerned about is that the balance of Hazeldean Road from where the development occurs over to Westridge is not being expanded with respect to bike lanes and sidewalks, etc. You've only limited it, and as I noted earlier, going west is where you access schools and access parks.
Okay, thank you. And again, on transition. So staff clarified, I think, this morning in their presentation, in the report, it says the building is generally within the 45-degree plane. The generally is that it's all but about a story and a half and a small corner. That's staff's evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
If we did not have that small corner, so if somehow that top of the building was angled off to make it fit within 45-degree, do you think that would be adequate transition, or do you think it requires more transition to meet the official plan?
And I apologize, and to Mr. Chair, I apologize. I should have done my timing a little bit better. I was going to talk a little bit more about transition, and I noted as well in the decision that was for Blair Road and Montreal Road, some of the transition ones which I forwarded on to staff had to do with the windows and balconies. And I will acknowledge that the developer has changed some of the design elements of the tower, and in particular the one for Blair Road and as accepted by the Land Tribunal. They did not have primary windows facing towards the neighborhoods, the absence of projecting balconies and recessed balconies. Those were all items that were missed, that were added to this angular plane. So I think you're quite correct, Councillor Gower. Transition is multifaceted. It's not just the angular plane, and we fully concur with that. So even though you may want to cut that corner off, I would suggest you not cut it off, and so you limit it to that particular level. But there are other things that need to be there for transition. And I would urge the city staff to come forward with more of those ideas, as was pulled out when you take a look at the Land Tribunal decision for Blair Road, etc. I think the other bit that was there related to that was when you talk about the heights, etc. There is the Stittsville secondary Main Street plan as well that does as well reference the use of the angular plane. But it's quite interesting in that one, though, they said that the surrounding residential context, the large lot fabric within Main Street can support increased densities and lower heights. And the community desires to maintain more human scale village atmosphere. So there are other elements that I would ask the councillors to consider when you talk about transition, and one of them being elements that are pulled out in the Stittsville Main Street secondary plan.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much for your delegation today. And since you mentioned Montreal and Blair, that is actually my catchment.
Okay.
So I've been on council 15 years. I've seen staff go against applications. I can't even count on one hand. It's extraordinarily rare. The city staff did go against that application. And you obviously know the outcome when it went to the provincial tribunal, it was overturned.
It was overturned, but I think there were elements in that report, and that's what I was trying to cite for you, that said, here are elements of additional considerations for transition. I agree 100%. It's unfortunate that we are in this void, if you will, between the official plan being there right now and the details of the zoning bylaws. And so you have to go with what you have in front of you. And that's why I went through many of the Land Tribunal decisions and said, what could you use from that to support a tempering of the amount of development? I think all of us in Stittsville support the development. It's the magnitude of it. And I was trying to give you evidence of what other things has the tribunal and other decisions used that would say this magnitude can be tempered. We all agree it needs to happen. I would suggest as well, the other thing that I noted as well, tonight, you all know that you're doing consultations now on the new zoning. Tonight is the consultation time for Stittsville. What a poor opportune
So,
time. You're
so
gonna hear
just to
about
be
what people's
cognizant
agenda
of
now on
everyone's
that.
time here, if I could just ask the question, we'll get answers and move along a little
Okay.
quicker here. So you're aware that the times as council, we stand up and support decisions against an application get overturned. This is prior to the province really coming down with new bills that essentially neuter a lot of councillors. We don't even have staff coming out to a lot of meetings anymore because that's not part of the plan anymore. It's about intensification. We've had our community meeting in the east already on zoning, and I've been ringing alarm bells. Character of community holds no water. That literally, they should just rip that out of the book, crumple it up and throw it away. It means nothing. So knowing that that's all on our plate and you have a very strong advocate in your counselor doing very similar to what I did, unfortunately, we know what the outcome's going to be. In our case with that building at Blair, Montreal, there was no consent, nothing changed. They got literally everything they wanted. And so on that, knowing that you're fully, I guess the simple question as the chair is indicating to me, speed it up here. What do you anticipate if this went to the tribunal that even if we voted against it, what do you think the tribunal would do?
I hope that you could cite other things that the tribunal has cited, such as additional transitional features, and said those things need to be brought forward and clearly articulated. I think that they would expect as well that you can have staff show their own calculations of the 45-degree angular plane and ask for that.
Yeah.
Do I think that they'll overturn it? No. There's no magic, I don't think, in saying, is the building 23, 21, 25 stories?
No,
That's up, that you'd have to ask the developer. I think that's a business model that they have in terms of that. I will say though, and the developer has worked with the city staff. They have put in the podiums. They have changed the balconies.
Okay.
And I commend the staff for doing that with them.
Yeah.
And I would hope that maybe there's some more of these things that you'll hear from other people today. Maybe there's some other additional small compromises that can be done. Having said that though, please, that's one about the building itself, but please consider that portion of the roadway too and the deficiencies that it currently has right now.
A great
in addition
delegation
to
today.
the actual build itself, please.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanna. I don't see any other questions for you. Appreciate you coming out today. Stéphane Boucher is next. Is online, I take it?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Ah,
Yeah, hi, good morning. Sven Boucher here. I'm a
Ms.
resident
Boucher,
of,
we can't hear you. We see you?
hello, can you hear me now? Hello?
Can hear him online.
Yeah, I can hear him fine.
Thanks for throwing me a lifeline. Hello? Hello?
Sorry, Mr. Boucher, we're just experiencing some
That's okay.
technical challenges. We're waiting to be able to hear you. I see Councillor Johnson, I think, is hopefully getting something to clerk. Councillor Johnson, are you able to hear through Zoom the
Yes,
delegation?
Councillor Kelly and I could.
And now we can't hear you.
Yeah, you guys couldn't hear me during
And
roll
Clark
call
is.
either.
It's okay, so we have a bit of a problem getting the audio from the Zoom call into the committee room. Sit tight, folks. We'll be back. Can I think we're going to move on to the next delegate. Can I just confirm with those on Zoom, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Kelly, you can hear us, right?
I can hear you.
Yep. Okay. So while we're working to get the audio from Zoom into this room, we'll move on to Mr. David Meny. Good morning, Mr. Meny. Same ground rules whenever you're ready.
There we go. All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you to the Planning and Housing Committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is David Meny, and as a budding homeowner to the 6310 Hazeldean Road site at 37 Kyle, directly behind the 21-story tower, and a resident of Stittsville for over 8 years, I'm one of the most impacted residents from this proposal. I have a very vested interest in holding Devmont accountable. I think it's extremely important that the City of Ottawa get this right. I completely appreciate the comments from Councillor Tierney earlier about the fact, why are we even bothering to do this? Because developers always get what they want. The truth is I'm here to basically try to hold them accountable. And Kimberly Baldwin, the lead planner on this file, was also the planner on 1649 Montreal Road, which is actually the building in question here. So the two core arguments for my 5 minutes will be focused on suitable transition. It is critical that suitable transition to abutting low-rise areas be demonstrated in order for high-rise building to be cleared at this site. Otherwise, it's mid-rise, that's 9 stories in the Suburban Transact. And secondarily, infrastructure is not sufficient to support this project or others near it. Also note the site is not in a transit priority corridor. There has never been a high-rise building approved, to my recollection, in the City of Ottawa, unless there was proximity to transit. So that's another argument we're going to make here. So moving forward, if we can just go forward a slide, that orange backyard is mine. The 21-story view there is pretty shocking. The orange box on the right side is the site, and the blue line is the transit corridor. So the reality is this is not in a transit corridor, nowhere near transit, no buses running on this section of road, despite Councillor Gower saying there will be a local 163 bus coming to a theater near us. That's a local bus, 30 minutes to Terry Fox Drive. I just spent an hour and a half trying to get to this meeting on the bus today. That ain't gonna cut it. Next slide, please. So just to remind ourselves of the zoning bylaw, this is the goals of our arterial Main Street AM9 zoning, which this site is in. Number 1 might be met, but number 2, ensuring that this building and site are compatible with the surrounding uses. That's what I'm questioning today. Next slide. If we look at the urban design guidelines, which again have been mentioned by the planner and councillors as just guidelines, not anything we really have to follow. But just to put it out there, 2 of the 6 are met. The bottom 4, compatible development, comfortable pedestrian environment, gradual transition, linked to public transit, all fail. Next slide. And if we look at the definition of transition in the official plan, right? Angular plane is not met. Podium, sure, they added it after we asked. Setbacks, generous. Step backs, insufficient. So that's another violation of the official plan and its text. Next slide. I'm not going to read all this text, but one of the other things we talk about in suitable transition besides the 45-degree angular plane, which I'll go through, is the floor plate. Maximum floor plate for a tower of this height is 750 square meters. This particular design is actually 820. The only reason for an allowed additional floor plate is generally to minimize shadows, and various other things, of which this site has done none of that. Next slide, please. So it's just another area where transition hasn't been met. And of course, where the lot fabric can provide a suitable transition to abutting low-rise, high-rise development may, and I emphasize may be permitted. Generally adhering to a 45-degree angular plane, where's the calculation? Did the city even do one? As shown by Kimberly today, that was the applicant's diagram. I've been following this file for probably about 2.5 years now. That diagram's changed 5 times. Every time it is wrong. And if we advance to the next slide, you'll see in the urban design guidelines on the left, that is directly from the city document. This is how the measurement should be made. The right is the applicant's document. It's placed on the property line, not the setback line. And if you actually do the math, which is on the next slide, you will see that 15 stories is the maximum height that fits under the plane by that calculation. If you actually put the angular plane calculation on the property line, the maximum height is 18 stories. Either way, it is not 21, it is not 25, it is not every other proposal they have made. Just also note that throughout this proposal, the developer has not compromised one iota. It was 431 units when it was a 25-story building and a 9-story building. It's still 431 units as a 12-story building and a 21-story building. We're the only ones compromising as residents here. So I ask that the City of Ottawa provide the calculations they used for suitable transition and the criteria around it. Do not just accept the applicant's diagrams. Next slide, please. What other evidence of transition is shadow?
Mr. Manny, you are out of time.
Okay. Sure.
But I suspect
I can't see the time, so I'm unaware.
I suspect your counselor may have some questions.
Yeah, please.
I do. I also wanted to thank David for being here in person, coming in from Stittsville, probably taking some time off work to do so, to be in front of Planning and Housing Committee.
Yeah.
And acknowledge to a number of the people who we're going to hear from today, including Mr. Meny, are immediate neighbors to this property. And I think often applicants and staff and even counselors, we talk about minimal impact and the impacts can be mitigated. No matter what, if you have a 21-story building with 400 apartments, no matter what we do to mitigate impact, there is significant impact to Mr. Meny and his neighbors who live immediately adjacent to
Very
this.
true.
This is right next to your backyard. So I want to acknowledge that. You've raised a number of things that I will bring up, or my colleagues will bring up with staff and the applicant, I'm sure. But on proximity to transit, you're absolutely right. This is not on a transit priority corridor. It's about 200 meters or so away from a transit. That's a 2-minute walk. So isn't that close enough?
I guess you could hop on the sidewalk that goes nowhere and walk through the farmer's field to get to it. But the reality is there's still no rapid transit on that road.
What
Like on Hazeldean and Carp Road, which by the way also hasn't been widened. So I don't think the infrastructure here is at all adequate. And as a transit rider, the only rapid transit connecting to the actual downtown is the 262 running on Westridge. That doesn't go down Hazeldean, that doesn't go down Carp, that doesn't go down anything near there. It goes down Westridge, right? So it's a significant walk from the site on a sidewalk that doesn't exist and won't exist from this developer or the city.
And I also wanted to ask, thank you for that. I also wanted to ask, as an immediate neighbor, I know you have concerns about shadow impact. What are some of the things you'd like staff today to address around shadows on this site?
Well, so it's amazing if you do the 45-degree angular plane calculation right, which gets it at 15 stories, the shadows cast on my property are well within the guideline, only within 2 hours of sunset. However, at 21 stories, it's a 4-hour impact on my specific property. The guidelines say you cannot put shadows on a residential area within 2 hours on 2 consecutive times in June and September. This is within 4 hours. So this is highly egregious. So I would say reduce the height, make it compliant with the plan, and I don't have a problem with the build. And so I won't have shadows on my property, so what am I complaining about? But at the current heights, yeah, 4 hours of shadow impact is insane for my property.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions from members. I just want to say thanks very much for grounding very thoroughly your presentation in the language of the official plan. We don't often get such well-researched community submissions, and that was well done. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Leeper. And quite honestly, I don't want to minor in planning, but I've sort of had to. The reality is this, though, it's actually been a lot of learning for me to go through all this. I feel like I've done my homework. And I'm just asking that that the city does theirs as well. So thanks so much.
Thank you. My understanding is that the audio issues are now addressed and we should be able to hear Zoom audio here in this room. So, Mr. Stéphane Boucher?
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. We can hear you. You have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And my apologies for not being in the room. I'm currently in Mallory Town, my RV. So I'm a resident of Smoke Tree Crescent. I'm a 35-year veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces, and I chose to retire in Stittsville since I've resided there since 2011. I have 4 points, and I'll meet the 5-minute requirement. The first one is to answer a comment or a question from earlier. We have to do the right thing. Even if we think the recommendation from the city should be to overturn the project, but the tribunal would overturn that decision, it doesn't matter. Do the right thing, gain the confidence of the constituents, and the tribunal will then start seeing as we overturn applications at our municipal level, then perhaps there's something there that they need to scratch that itch, if you will. The 3 comments specifically to this development. One is the comprehensive approach to the assessment. I think the staff did some good work in terms of doing the assessment. However, you can't take it just as in 6310 alone. Within 800 meters of the proposed site, we're talking at least 3 more developments that are going to be going in the future years. There's the one by the tower, there's the one on the corner of Carp and Hazeldean, and then potentially the one with the ranch, if you will, to the west that may develop into another housing development. So to the point, and to the point about transit, I'll get to in a sec, if you start taking all of these together, we're going to have a serious issue. So we're not against densification. There's some technical aspects to the amplitude of the project which should be addressed, but all of that has to be considered together. And it's not one builder's fault in particular, but I think the buck has to stop with the planning committee as they have the overview on all the projects brought together. Tactically, if you will, and specifically to this development, the first one is the issue of transit that I'd like to speak to. And I put it in terms of traffic. So you've heard the comments about the inadequacy of Hazeldean in terms of its breadth. You've heard about accidents in the past on the corner of Hazeldean and Carp. We've talked about the transit just in the last question. You know, it used to take pre-pandemic, pre-LRT, it would take me as a member of the Canadian Armed Forces 45 minutes to take the bus to get downtown. Today, it takes an hour and a half. We're not on a major transit hub. I don't see when it's going to be. And the only way to make it so is to increase our taxes to accommodate a desire of the builder who probably wouldn't be contributing to that. So I urge the committee to think about transit, not just in terms of 6310 and the fact that it's a 200-meter walk to 262, but that the 262 is inadequate, and the remainder of the developments are going to be depending on the limited transit we have. So we have a serious crunch. And my last point, which is regards to safety. I raised 4 children in Stittsville. They graduated from Sacred Heart High School, but we were blessed by the distance from Sacred Heart High School. We had bus. If you think of young families living in 6310, the 2 closest elementary schools are Laurier Cassidy and St. Stephen. They're a minimum 700-meter walk, but they're not within the maximum or to get them to use school bus. So now they got to walk along Hazeldean, which is a zoo on best days with the gravel trucks coming in from the pits of to the west. It's the traffic on to cross Westridge, take the sidewalk to then get to Laurier Cassidy, or then walking along Hazeldean to get to St. Stephen is a bit ridiculous, if you ask me. So, you know, building a sidewalk just to Carp is going to be inadequate. How are people going to walk along Carp to then get to things like Independent, the dental clinics that are there and whatnot? That hasn't been considered in this equation. So again, I'm just harkening back to my first point, and I'll conclude with that. We need to have a comprehensive approach on this development. It's not just about 6310. It's about 4 major developments within less than a kilometer radius. And I'm urging this committee to do the right thing, right? You all expected this of me when I served in the military. I'm expecting this of you. If it doesn't make sense, do the right thing, overturn the application or force them to remain within the confines of the person who spoke before me, and then we can move forward. I don't care about the outcome of the tribunal right now. I care that we, as a city, are doing the right thing. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you for your patience during that technical difficulty we had. I want to push back a little bit on you because I agree with you. As it stands now, the transportation network and infrastructure in Stittsville is not great in this part of the community. But hypothetically, if Carp Road was upgraded to 2 lanes and had sidewalks and bike paths on both sides, if Hazeldean Road was upgraded with proper pedestrian and cycling facilities, if there was frequent transit service to this part of Hazeldean Road, would you then be okay with a 21-story building, or would there still be an objection to that?
It's a chicken and the egg. So if I refer back to the LRT and some of the comments made by Mr. Mayor with regards to the LRT and some of the transit pressures we're suffering as a town, I think even if you could promise me that, I don't know if it would be delivered in my lifetime. So the answer would be no from that perspective, but Hazeldean is beyond the extension or the expansion of Hazeldean to Carp. Hazeldean all the way west back to Wards Carlton Place as you get to the highway. As the trucks come in from the gravel pit, those the semi trucks, the delivery trucks, as they come down that stretch of Hazeldean, it's a drag race. I mean, I walk there every day. It's part of my retirement plan. Save my back, do a lot of walking. I bike there every day, and it's scary the speed they come down at. So it's not just transit; it's the whole traffic situation on that Hazeldean corner with Carp. It is a bit of a zoo. So no, I don't think, even if you could, unless you ran the LRT directly through to where the giant tiger is and people can get there, we can stay off the road, maybe, but that's not going to happen in my lifetime. So I'm afraid I can't be all that supportive.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Boucher. I do not see any further questions for you. Thank you very much for your presentation today. And I will call on Tony Dilliot. I apologize for the pronunciation of that name. With the same, grab a seat, and whenever you're ready, the microphone is on, and we're in your hands for a 5-minute presentation.
So
okay, perfect.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, thanks. My name's Tony Dilliot. I've been a Stittsville resident since 1998, and I'm here to talk about a number of issues, but we don't have time. So I'm going to focus on one, which is safety. Next slide, please. In the planning department report, the word safety appeared one time in a note that said the issue was raised. But the issue that was submitted by myself to the planning department regarding safety has not been addressed. And so I'd like to jump straight into that right now. I think previous speakers have highlighted there's a number of issues with this application that none of us can properly address using suitable references in a 5-minute period of time. Next slide, please. So on the left-hand side is one of the submissions from the original application where a representation of Hazeldean Road was inserted by the developer, which completely mischaracterizes Hazeldean Road at the subject property. Hazeldean Road at the subject property is a rural road. The current zoning is AM9 highway commercial residential use excluded. On the left-hand side, you'll also see that the applicant put in the accessibility to parks and recreation as a key part of justifying the density of their proposal. And you will note, as previous speakers have highlighted, in order to get to those facilities, including a preschool, an elementary school, parks, and community rink, you must progress, or the direction of travel is west on Hazeldean Road to Westridge Drive. On the right-hand side, you'll note or see what the characterization of that entire section from Carp Road to Westridge Drive. There are no bus stops on either side of the road. None. It's a gravel road. There is ditches with open drainage and open culverts. Is that safe? Is there any Main Street corridor section with this type of project that has that type of frontage along it to walk to school? Next slide. Since it's not easy to recognize and see it, about a week ago, I went out onto the road and took a picture so that people could actually get an appreciation on the left-hand side of what it looks like for people who would be at this location. So on the left-hand side, at the very bottom to the left, I'm standing in front of the subject property facing west to Westridge Drive. Beyond that stoplight is Highway 7, and the next is Carlton Place. That is highway traffic. This is a rural road with highway traffic. To get to elementary school, to get to preschool and parks, you need to walk down this section of road. Now, I zoomed in a little bit because, to my surprise, when I happened to take the picture, there was a pedestrian, and sitting at the corner was a school bus. So you don't have to take my word for it that people are already, with no residential use allowed on this road, people are already using it for walking, biking, and the school is around that corner. So if you zoom in on the left-hand side, or sorry, on the right-hand side, I zoomed out so that you could see that any attempt to upgrade this road, where's the safe spot for transit? Where would you put a transit spot? In the wintertime, where would you walk? You would be pushed off the gravel onto the road surface. Where are you going to bike? Where are children going to bike? Where are parents going to push their strollers to get to the park? Now, there's nothing there right now. Now, after this project gets done, put hundreds of people multiple times a day into this picture. What's going to happen? This is not safe. Next slide. So the response I'm expecting to get is, well, what if we upgrade? What if we prioritize the upgrading of the highway? This upgrade is currently not even on the to-do list of the city. We're already in Stittsville significantly behind on critical projects like the widening of Carp Road, the grant extension, and I won't even bring up transit, but I will. There are no bus stops on this road, and there cannot be any put in safely without doing a major upgrade. To put it kindly, the city in Stittsville, in our community, has zero credibility on making any commitments on delivering any meaningful infrastructure in any period of time. We cannot hope.
I need to cut you off on that.
We cannot hope to fix safety.
Councillor Brockington has some questions for you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, sir, for your presentation today. And I appreciate the safety lens that you've brought as part of your presentation this morning. And that's certainly something that all of us should use, not just in our current wards and what's best for our ward, but across the city. So I appreciate that. If this proposal is approved by council, ultimately approved by council, and in the theme of safety and deficiencies in current infrastructure in the immediate community, can you just elaborate for us what are those priorities? If we had a magic wand and could address the lack of infrastructure that exists, if we can make this safer for all future users of the immediate community, what has to happen to make this safe if this development goes ahead?
I'm not quite sure I understand the scope of your question.
Sure.
Do you mean in the context of this specific application, or do you mean in Stittsville in general?
No, just in the immediate vicinity. So the road network, lack of sidewalks, someone said the area is not served by buses. What do the non-local councillors have to be aware of so that if we wanted to address the lack of sufficient infrastructure, I need you to prioritize that?
Well, I mean, how do you prioritize safety in what context? There's no buses. There's the applicant wants extra bikes and no cars. So you're forcing people onto pedestrian, biking, transit. If everybody had a car, but you know, so that's why I'm confused by your question. I will say the comment of one of my or one of my neighbors earlier about the city using the applicant's material is, accurate, right? They're showing all the pictures with a nice, beautiful Hazeldean road that exists on the other side of Carp Road. So, I mean, I would, for Councillor Leiper's suggestion, I spent hours looking for a definition of what constitutes a major corridor from a safety perspective. And like Mr. Meny said, I am not a minor in, urban planning. I'm a high-tech engineer, right? This is not my field of expertise, but as an engineer, I'm looking for supporting material. I can't find it. Otherwise, I would have used it in the presentation. So you tell me what's required. You guys are the experts, but I can tell you right now, you stand out there where I took that picture with those dump trucks going past, people walking on that gravel road, who's going to be held accountable when somebody gets killed?
I appreciate, again, what you've brought to the table. What I try and tease out from proposals before us that are not in my ward, where I'm not as familiar with the immediate community, is that if a development proceeds, what are the local deficiencies when it comes to infrastructure in particular? And that could be something as part of the site plan, as part of a budget ask, the local councillor. If we collectively think that we're putting the public in jeopardy, we could prioritize an infrastructure upgrade.
That's why I put that slide in, Councillor. And I will say that my last slide with conclusions, site plan cannot address these issues because the subject issues are not on that location. It can't be dealt with in site plan. It can only be dealt here. And as my neighbor mentioned previously, we have to do the right thing here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for being here. I want to push in or zoom in on one part of this, just to give clarity, committee, because someone might argue that there is a park right across the street. You can cross at the lights, walk across the Farm Boy in front of the Farm Boy, and you get to Kitawake Park, big park. Or you could cross at the lights and use the pathway to get to Westridge and then cross back over and have reasonable access to parks and schools and other neighborhood amenities. Why isn't that good enough? Why do you want to see sidewalk on both sides of the road?
Well, on either side, but the applicant highlighted specifically Westridge Park as the park, first of all. Second of all, that development is on the south side and the schools are on the south side. So you show me any 8, 9, 10-year-old kid on a bike, which way are they going to go? They're going to go to the park they go past every day, which is the one on Westridge Drive.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Schröster.
Hi, Tony. Thank you for
Hi.
being here. I think the concerns you bring up are, we end up with a consistent challenge at Planning Committee, and Councillor Kitts can speak to this too. The issue of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, the housing or the supporting transportation infrastructure. I will tell you, I am a member of the sponsors group for the Transportation Master Plan Part 2, and I will take your concerns seriously. And I do think it's really important that when we plan our transportation, that it works together with where we're seeing densification. And so some of the concerns which absolutely cannot be dealt with during site plan, they can be dealt with by Transportation Committee and by our master plan. So I really appreciate your concerns. I just had one question though. You mentioned something about the development wanting to have no cars, but if I'm not mistaken, it's 431 apartments and 478 vehicle parking spots. Do you have concerns about that?
Well, they're asking for a reduction in parking and more bikes.
But there's more than 1-to-1 ratio here. So you're suggesting.
All I'm saying is that the objective of council has been to make 15-minute communities, more walking, more biking, et cetera, et cetera. And you are putting more pedestrian and bike traffic on a rural road.
Okay, well, I hope that by placing more people there, it will accelerate the improvements that make it a more livable community.
So when it comes to safety, I would suggest that you cannot, it's the chicken that comes first. In other words, it has to be safe. So the conclusion that I had on the last slide, which I think you have a copy of, is that This application should not proceed until there is a guarantee, not a promise, a guarantee, ideally completed, that has the appropriate safe infrastructure in place to support changing the zoning from highway commercial. There's a reason the current zoning excludes residential use. It's not safe.
Okay, understood. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say, I do have much empathy for the concerns that you're bringing forward. I'm sure members of the committee feel it could be an application in South Orleans. You could be delegates from my ward, because we hear the same concerns from these suburban areas that are less connected than the rest of the city, but are experiencing a lot of growth. So you may have heard my comments on.
I did, and I completely sympathize.
Yeah. So,
especially the fact that you were outvoted. I understand how this game is played.
yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a challenge, as my colleague just noted. We have a new official plan that is, taking direction from the province. And, I think one of your neighbors gave us some questions to ask of staff in terms of, adherence to that. But I think we are going to have a lot more conversations like this as our city continues to grow and as we contemplate the zoning bylaw. And I think, there is a significant concern for growing communities. So I'll leave it there. I don't have a question, but I just wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the overriding zoning bylaw. And in my opinion, that bylaw should be addressing the point I made, which is what characterizes a major corridor in terms of safe infrastructure. And it should be in the bylaw that those minimum standards are met in order to change the zoning to permit something like this to be built on what is supposed to be a major corridor, but is like a 40-year horizon. 40 years, this hasn't even been 40 months.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Okay, thank you very much.
I don't see any other questions for you. Appreciate the delegation. Terry Clausen is not in a room, so online.
Mute.
Good morning, Terry.
You guys can all hear me? Okay, great.
Whenever you're ready.
All right, let me tee things up a bit. All right, first of all, thanks for giving me the chance to speak today. I really appreciate it. Just one moment. The screen hid my talking notes. Here we go. Okay, thanks. Okay, so my name is Terry Clausen. I live on Crantham Crescent in Stittsville. It's about 100 meters south of the 6310 proposed development. My family and I moved to Stittsville from Calgary about 18 years ago. A major reason for choosing to move to Stittsville was for quality of life. We selected Stittsville specifically because it was the furthest community from the very core of Ottawa. And within Stittsville, it was at the very outmost edge of the city. Development was never going to come here. Before we made the decision to buy a neighborhood, we confirmed the adjacent undeveloped properties were zoned to not exceed 15 meters, or approximately 4 stories. This is still the zoning restriction for the area. Unfortunately, when the city developed a new zoning plan, it seemed to be the best kept secret. The last 1 kilometer stretch of road between Stittsville, Maine and Westridge was being classified as a major artery, and that it may allow buildings up to 40 stories to be built. This being at the very outskirts of the city of Ottawa, and as you've heard from other speakers today, is on a gravel road. I've expressed my direct and profound disappointment to Mr. Gower that he didn't make any significant effort to communicate to the Stittsville community at that time that this was going to be in scope for the zoning change proposed. Certainly, the complaints of more than 1,000 residents would have been enormous at this time if we had understood what was recommended. Voicing our strong opposition to the zoning proposal for this stretch of road then may well have helped to head off the problem that we're having today if it wasn't indicated as a major artery. But we are where we are. The council's job now to assess the proposal in context of the current situation. The new zoning has not been finalized for the area, as I understand. It's not approved. The zoning hasn't been changed. And then you've heard tremendous opposition, today, but also from the community of Stittsville over the last several months. There's a number of reasons for opposing the proposal as it sits today: lack of traffic and transit infrastructure, safety, and others. But I'll speak to my major reason for opposition to the proposal. The lot fabric does not provide suitable transition to abutting low-rise houses. So before talking about why it doesn't, let me talk about some areas that are within the fabric of the community. So if I take a look at Stittsville specifically, the only completed development exceeding 4 stories proper in Stittsville is the Hazeldean Gardens. It's a retirement property. It sits on a standalone property at the intersection of Stittsville Main and Hazeldean, and it fits within the fabric of the community. It does provide suitable transition to the surrounding area. The next closest community with 8 to 12-story developments is about 8 kilometers away. That's in Canada, just east of Centrum. The property was standalone and it's not embedded into the surrounding community of 2-story homes. And it is adjacent to major transportation and transit corridors. And it fits within the fabric of the community. The closest community having developments greater than 20 stories or more than 20 kilometers to the east of Stittsville. They're much closer to major employment areas and access to public transportation. These come closer to making sense to what fits within the fabric of those communities. So I can really see, I get it. I can see why 6310 is so attractive to developers and investors. There's a really awesome opportunity to squeeze very much density. They're very small footprint. But, building these massive walls in this area hasn't been demonstrated from a current resident point of view. There's been some shadow studies, but not what it looks like, from the perspective that the people that live in the neighborhood, like me and my neighbors. You think you're on the first slide, Kelly, that shows the 6310 orientation? Is that right?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, good. All right. So I just wanted to, I think everyone knows where the property is in the yellow box. The purple, the pink arrow that's perpendicular to that, that's the views that I'm going to show you in the following slides that demonstrate what things look like from our vantage point. So if you don't mind moving to the next slide. The current view, this is the current view, actually Sunday's current view, looking north towards the proposed development. If you move to the next slide, there's a series of mock-ups that I'm showing to illustrate what it's like to have 4-story, 8-story, 12 stories, and 21-story structures, put into the facade in that skyline view. So 4 stories is what it's approved for today, clearly 2 stories above the current house at the end of the block. 8 stories takes away about half of our view of the skyline facade. 12 stories, takes away 2/3, and then the 21-story essentially provides a block out of the sky, unless you
10 seconds.
Go to the last slide, please. With 10 seconds, I don't have any chance to speak to it, but maybe some of the people can read. Thanks for the time to speak today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clausen. I'm looking around the board. I don't see any hands. Oh, your Councillor Gower.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any questions, but I just want to say thank you to Terry for participating in today's meeting and bringing that perspective from the point of view of Grantham Crescent. Thanks, Terry.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for your delegation today. Next up is Tiffany Young. We'll just give a second to see if she enters the room.
Hello?
Hi, Tiffany. I'm not sure
Hi.
if you've delegated before. You have 5
No.
minutes. I'll give you a 30-second warning before the end of the 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So good morning, council members and fellow residents. My name is Tiffany Young, and I'm here today representing the voices of over 700 residents who have signed a petition opposing the zoning bylaw amendment requests for 6310 Hazeldean Road. We strongly believe that this proposed development in its current form is unsuitable for our community and possesses significant concerns for the future of Stittsville. The proposed development seeks to permit buildings of 41 and 67.7 meters, making them the tallest structures not only in Stittsville, but along the entire Hazeldean-Robertson corridor. This is in stark contrast to the surrounding area, where most buildings are limited to 4 or 5 stories, allowing for high rises of this scale, particularly in a mature residential neighborhood, sets a dangerous precedent. These buildings will directly back onto single-family homes, disrupting the character of the area and leading to significant privacy and overshadowing concerns for existing residents. Our community is already grappling with strained infrastructure. Schools are overcrowded, roads are congested, and access to healthcare services like family doctors and practitioners is extremely limited.
Approving this development without first addressing these critical infrastructure deficits would only worsen the challenges we face. Councillor Glen's own comments acknowledge the concerns surrounding municipal and provincial infrastructure, and yet we are still waiting for clear solutions. Stittsville and Canada are experiencing rapid growth, but growth must be balanced with the needs and capacities of the existing community. The location at the end of Hazeldean Road is simply not equipped for the increased traffic and pedestrian flow that this development would bring. Hazeldean Road already struggles with traffic congestion, particularly during peak hours. The addition of high-rise buildings each with hundreds of residents will create gridlock, making this area unsafe for drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists. A lack of adequate parking will lead to spillover into neighboring communities such as Crossing Bridge and Timbermere, causing congestion and potentially unsafe parking situations in residential streets. I personally am very concerned about my children in Timbermere, as our backyard faces Hazeldean and there's a walking path. So I suspect many people will be parking on our street, and I am concerned for their safety. The city's official plan allows for taller buildings in certain areas, but only if there is suitable transition to lower rise neighborhoods. This proposal does not provide that. Instead, it would place high-rise towers next to single-family homes, creating a jarring and inappropriate contrast. We need to ask, what kind of community are we building? Do we want developments that harmonize with the surrounding areas, or do we allow projects that disregard the fabric of our neighborhoods? Moreover, while discussions have been had about sidewalks and transit, we have yet to see concrete plans for improved pedestrian access, enhanced public transit, or upgraded roads such as CARP. In conclusion, the rezoning amendment request is premature and inappropriate for our community. We urge the council to prioritize the concerns of local residents and reject this proposal in its current form. Growth is important, but it must be done thoughtfully with consideration for existing infrastructure and the character of the community. On behalf of the 700 plus residents who signed our petition, I respectfully request that you vote against this amendment. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tiffany, for your presentation this morning. I don't want to assume that my colleagues are fully aware of the Stittsville context. And early on in your presentation, you mentioned a concern with schools and with doctors. And I'm hoping you can articulate for the community what impact the shortage of schools and doctors is having on residents in Stittsville.
Yeah, so I'll start with doctors. So there are none. I see regularly people looking for family doctors. People are on the waiting list for years. There's a serious lack. We also don't have any walking clinics in Stittsville. So if you don't have a family doctor, which is the case for many, you have nowhere to go if you need immediate attention. If you are sick, if your child, has an earache, we have no local solutions. So if you're coming in and you don't have a car and you're trying to get to a walking clinic, you're going to have to take a bus to who knows where with a sick child or yourself sick. It's going to be very, very challenging because unfortunately we just do not have, I think, there's 2 clinics with doctors and their waiting lists are always closed. Schools, they're very overcrowded. And unfortunately, this would just mean more portables for the children. And we all know portables don't offer the best air environment. You have to go outside in the freezing rain. You have to go outside, in our super chaotic weather that we have in Ottawa. But also when you have overpopulated schools, your kids are going to be missing out because they're not going to have the resources to offer all of these extracurricular activities. And I know when they were building the elementary school in Blackstone, West Wind took all of the access of children. Their school was twice the capacity it should have been. They didn't have a gym. They didn't have a library. They couldn't have school events. They couldn't have like a school picnic. They didn't have plays. They didn't have picture days. Our children are only young ones. And by doing this, we're robbing them of the experiences that they deserve. And it's not fair to them. Also, just wanted to add, because it came up earlier about walkability and transit. And as a mother of 2 young children who are in activities, I will say Stittsville, even if you add buses to get, me to work, it's not a walkable community. And if my son's a hockey player, he plays for the Stittsville Rams, and he has games in Richmond, he has games in Osgood, he has games in Carleton Place and Beckwith, and just even practices, 3 times a week. As a mother, if I didn't have a car, my children could not participate in these sports because there's absolutely no way public transport's getting me anywhere near where my children need to be. So I think that's something really important to note.
Okay, thank you. And another question, if I can share. We've talked a lot about the transportation infrastructure deficit. And I agree with you. We're way behind on road projects, transit projects, pedestrian cycling projects. We also have 2 levels of government that are telling us we will not get any money for infrastructure unless we meet housing targets. If we don't build new homes, we do not get money. If we do not get money, those transportation projects will take even more years to happen. If you were sitting on this committee or on our city council, what would you do?
I would thoughtfully consider the type of homes I'm building in certain areas. I think, we have a housing crisis. Everybody's aware. We're not denying this. But you build up to make areas more dense. To me, it makes sense to build up the downtown core of Ottawa and then start moving out. You don't start at the most western and eastern edge of the city and then build up and then leave the density lacking in between. So I think we need to build, but I just think we need to build thoughtfully, because you're still going to increase your density, you're going to increase your population, but in a way that makes sense for the communities that we're building in. But also, you're not gonna, we know there's the 6310 Hazeldean, there's the 60, I don't remember the number, but beside the Red Barn Dentistry, and then the old flea market, that's going to be developed. And then we have the Sunshine Farms, which just got torn down, which beside Timbermere, which we know is going to be developed. And we're about to create such a disaster. And we live in Timbermere, so my children have to cross Hazeldean to get to school. And I won't let them because it is so dangerous now. It is a very scary road. People drive very fast. I hear it from my house. We have racers and everything. So it's just, we need to be mindful. We need to be smart about this. And you can't look back in retrospect and say we should have done this different. We need to make smart choices now. And I just want to say, as an Algonquin, because this has also come up, our city and our home is under threat from developers who prioritize profit over community. And we have to stay strong, and we have to stand up to what we believe in. And we have to hope that the tribunals will one day understand that, because we need to show our children that we will fight for what we believe in, and we are trying to create a future for them that they will be proud of.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Young, I don't see any further questions for you. Thank you very much for your presentation today. We're going to move on to our final public delegation, Tina Lipsey.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Planning and Housing Committee regarding the proposal at 6310 Hazeldean Road. Understanding that there is a shortage of affordable housing in Canada and that cities are required to contribute to the resolution of the problem, my spouse and I continue to have concerns regarding the zoning bylaw application, amendment application for the site at 6310 Hazeldean for the following reasons. Firstly, the current road infrastructure will not be able to handle an increase in traffic that will result from the pollution created at the apartment complex. Already, Carp Road and Hazeldean Road are unable to handle the current volume of traffic, particularly during rush hour. The increase in traffic associated with 431 apartments, 389 resident vehicular parking spaces, and 86 visitor spaces, as well as the plan to have only one vehicular access to the complex, will result in backed up traffic on Hazeldean Road. Before even considering approval of the zoning bylaws that would allow a sizable development such as the one proposed by Devmont to be built, Carp Road needs to be widened to support the volume of traffic coming off the 417 highway. Currently, there are times when traffic approaching the Carp Road exit is backed up onto the highway, creating an extremely dangerous situation. The traffic associated with the 431 apartments would exacerbate this already perilous traffic. The proposal includes 446 bicycle parking spaces. However, the volume of traffic on both Hazeldean and Carp Road with inadequate or no bicycle lanes makes bicycle use as a mode of transportation dangerous to both bicyclists and motorists. The September 11 Planning and Housing Committee report proposes that, and I quote, rezoning will increase the required minimum biking parking rate from 0.5 spaces per dwelling unit to 1 space per dwelling unit to further promote cycling as a viable alternative mobility option for the future residents. In reality, very few residents of Timbermere or Westbridge use cycling as a means of transport, as it is extremely unsafe to do so, and there are very few amenities in the west end of Stittsville that have bicycle racks. For my spouse and I, after a combined total of 63 years of military service to our country, we purchased our forever home in Timbermere, appreciating the small town feel of suburban Stittsville. We specifically wanted to buy in an area where there are single family homes, no apartment buildings, a less dense area than downtown Ottawa, and the benefits of suburban living. Allowing a 21-story apartment building to be built in an area that does not have sufficient amenities, transportation, and roadway infrastructure to accommodate the increased density that would result, not to mention completely changing the entire fabric of the community, although I know that this doesn't count from hearing what's been said previously. I think it's unfair to current residents who've invested in their homes and properties and will be directly and negatively by the second and third order effect of this development. And there's a reason why people choose to live in Stittsville, which is to enjoy the benefit of city living without having to deal with the crowding, busy amenities, and congested traffic associated with downtown Ottawa. The fact that the city received a petition in April 2024 with over 700 signatures in opposition to the proposed amendment, I think speaks volumes to the fact that a 21-story apartment building is not welcome in this community. So thank you for your time and your consideration of my statement when making your vote.
Thank you very much. Vice Chair Gower has questions.
Thank you, Tina, for your presentation today. I'm going to ask a similar question to what I asked maybe two of the previous speakers, because you were talking about the road infrastructure and the need to widen Carp Road to 2 lanes to provide adequate capacity for traffic. I agree with you. If there was a reasonable timeline that would say Carp Road will be upgraded at about the same time that people move into this building, would you support 430 apartments here, or would you still have issues and concerns?
So I would expect that the roadway infrastructure would be put in place prior to and not at the same time that the building is being constructed. I think there's some danger in building the apartment complex and then hoping that the infrastructure follows. And if it doesn't, then we're in the situation where there are the safety concerns that my fellow neighbors have spoken about. I do think that having 2 lanes on Carp Road, an expansion of the current infrastructure, I think 431 apartment buildings is still too many for the specific area in Stittsville. It's going to create, like, there are amenities across the road at Farm Boy and in the strip mall close to Farm Boy, but that particular intersection is going to become very, very busy and very dangerous. And I think what happens is when roadways become busy, people become frustrated, people are trying to make timings, people take risk. They will go through a yellow light, they'll try to make a quick right turn without properly looking. And I think that folks who have the power to make sure that this building complex is done with thoughtfulness and with safety concerns in mind, they have to think about the impact to local residents. And it's whether you have children, and I could understand my previous neighbors, previous lady who spoke, and a neighbor in Timbermere, her concerns because she has children. I have adult children, but I also do not want to see myself or any of my fellow neighbors be put in a position where, through potentially no fault of our own, we are responsible for the death of someone at an intersection, a busy intersection or roadways where children may be walking because there isn't the current infrastructure in place, and have to live with that for the rest of our lives. I really think that some more thought needs to go into this build. And I think that we cannot be complacent, as we often are as Canadians. I think we do need to use our voice and say that this is more than just being opposed to a development, because it's going to be a high-rise building in the west end of Stittsville, but that we, as a community, have some serious concerns regarding the safety of our future neighbors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Thank you, Ms. Lipsey. That is it for the public delegations that we have. So we'll move on to the applicant team, who have the opportunity to make a 5-minute presentation and take questions.
And we do have a PowerPoint that Roberto is going to go through. There you go. Thanks.
Good morning, Chair, councilors, and member of planning staff. My name is Roberto Campos, and I'm partnered with Figure Architects. On behalf of our entire team, we thank you for the opportunity to allow us to speak on this important project. I and members from FOTEN and the ownership group Devmont are here to answer your questions and to describe the various aspects that have guided the proposal, design solutions that meet the intents of the policy frameworks for this site. Next slide, please. Located on Hazeldean Road and just south of the Carp Road intersection, this site sits immediately across the street from the Stittsville Corners Retail Center, a retail center that includes a Farm Boy, a fitness center, and various other retail offerings. Next slide. From this contextual map, you can see that the site is also close to various parks and within 900 meters to Stittsville Main Street. Next slide. FOTEN's Miguel Tremblay and Patricia Warren are here to answer any questions you may have towards specific policy and planning rationale statements. However, from a high-level perspective, aspects as allowable heights, density located along Main Street corridors, and allowable program have been guides for this proposal. Next slide. Specifically, this project proposes a 2-building concept with both 12 and 21-story buildings and with over 400 units varying typologies. The project provides almost 0.9 cars per unit and 1 per visitor, an average of over 1 bicycle storage space per unit, and over 3,300 square feet of amenities are also provided. Next slide. As you all know, projects like this don't happen in a vacuum. Months of design evolution have happened through multiple community meetings and presentations, meetings with planning staff, and with Councillor Gower. Many of the final solutions have directly come from these meetings. We have also evaluated past submissions to develop a proposal that tries to balance the needs and concerns of the community, the goals and policies of the city's official plan, and the developer's business values and objectives. Next slide. Development is not easy, as we as a team understand and are sympathetic to its impact. However, this proposal really attempts at meeting the balanced needs and opportunities of the site. a site that is over 152 meters wide and one that ranges between 57 meters deep at its smallest side yard and almost 99 meters at its deepest. This is a large lot suitable for this proposal. Next slide. The building's faces along Hazeldean have been articulated with varying masses, heights, and step backs while creating the urban wall experience expected of an arterial Main Street design. Next slide. And main entries are active, transparent, and accessible. Next slide. As mentioned, amenities have played a major role in the design of the proposal. A large amenity terrace above the parkade not only helps to minimize exposed surface parking areas, but also provides generous and real amenity opportunities for the future tenants, helping to minimize the impact on local parks and infrastructure. Community gardens, a 30% energy savings target, heat island reduction strategies, and electric vehicle charging stations are some of the other goals for this project. Next slide. Obviously, transition has been a major discussion in the design development of the proposal. We have introduced a building massing and terracing transition strategy that goes from 2 and 3 stories, then to 7, and finally 12 and 21. We are proposing a green wall along the south face of the 2-story parkade. Next slide. As well as a continuous 10-meter green buffer at the rear yard, including its foundations, that will allow existing and future tree root systems to continue to thrive. These aspects have allowed for an appropriate transition to the low-rise neighborhood and locating the high density along Hazeldean. Next slide. As mentioned, through various meetings and back and forth sessions with Councillor Gower and with city staff, the proposal was reduced from 25 stories to 21. And as you can see, to be closer to the angular plane guideline. Only a small portion of the top 2 floors on the 21st and 20th, just that little corner, are actually touching the angular plane guideline. Next slide. Appropriate transition for this project is in keeping with good design principles and guidelines by focusing the height along Hazeldean. Next slide. In conclusion, this proposal transforms a vacant brownfield site along a Main Street corridor that has been identified for intensification, is consistent with the policy direction of the official plan, including with respect to allowable building heights and transition, and will provide much needed housing by contributing with a range of dwelling types and sizes within the Stittsville community. Thank you.
Do you have 1 minute remaining?
In that case, we can maybe address some of the comments made by the delegation and reinforce some of the comments that were made earlier. But the OLT decision that was referenced by some of the previous delegations also provided some fairly clear guidance that infrastructure improvements are often going to follow development as a result of development charges and needs. The south side of Stittsville right now is characterized by 3 large vacant properties. It wouldn't be reasonable for the city to provide transit to that portion of Hazeldean, but as development accrues through density and the redevelopment of all those properties, and the city will turn its attention to providing those transit services. In the interim, the developer has been working with staff to put in a sidewalk to supplement. There is a signalized intersection on the site that provides direct access to a sidewalk on the north side of Hazeldean that does connect to CARP. But the desire from staff was to have a more fulsome, and the councillor and the community, a more fulsome sidewalk network. So there will be an additional sidewalk installed, including on the abutting property. So there are going to be interim measures until the city has a more fulsome approach to their Hazeldean design. 1 minute. Thanks.
Okay. I have 3 questions to start. In terms of the mix of units and like size of units, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom bachelors, what is being contemplated right now?
Well, we currently have about 50% of 2 bedrooms and more, and about 10% of 3 bedrooms. As for size, usually the 1 bedroom run in the 600 square foot range. The 2 bedrooms would usually run in the 8 to 850, and the 3 bedrooms, the 1100 square feet.
Okay. And level of affordability. Can you comment about, will any of these be affordable units or how?
So
what's the
in
price
the last three projects that we did, we're from Montreal, so we've done multi-phase projects in Montreal, upwards of 500 units per project. And we're dealing most specifically right now with CMHC financing for those programs. So we've already been approved for all of our projects that we've done in the last 3 years. And so the financing that we're chasing with CMHC is going to be for affordable housing. And so basically the program states that the overall rent of the project needs to be at 90% of market. So it's an overall 10% reduction in the rental rates. Plus there needs to be, on this project of this scale, it would be around 95 units that would rent at 70% of what CMHC considers a good rent for people, which is 30% of their income. So 95% of those units would rent at 70% of that 30% median income. So overall 10% reduction plus 95 units that would rent at 70% of 30% median income.
Okay, thank you.
Just as a small point, as part of your approach, you are setting aside space on the ground floor for a nonprofit use.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask about. That's a relatively new part of this. It wasn't part of the community meeting we had back in the spring. So could you elaborate on what that space is, what it could be?
So what we've done in our last project is we've set aside a 500 square foot space for a local distribution point for food banks and 1,000 square foot space for a local community group to have their offices. So we're not looking at having retail or any high traffic demand. So really 1,000 square foot for offices for a community organization. And then the 500 square foot that we did was a drop-off point. So the main food bank would be able to drop off baskets there once or twice a week, depending on the needs. And then volunteers can go pick up the baskets from there and then distribute in the surrounding areas. So that's what we did in our last project, and we're planning on the future phase that we have in Montreal, and we're planning on trying to do the same here in Stittsville. We find that giving back to the community is very important for us, and so that's one way to chip in.
Okay, thank you. The last question, we've heard from 7 delegations. I think every one of them mentioned the transportation deficit we have in Stittsville. It was a theme in the public meeting we had. Almost every piece of correspondence we had on this, and there were hundreds, mentioned that. Are you not concerned about market viability of this project? Like the road network isn't there yet, the bus network isn't there yet, and you're going to market this building, 431 units. Are you not concerned that potential tenants may look at those transportation challenges and say, we don't want to rent here?
I would argue that any project is concerned with traffic and transportation. Obviously, right now there's no light rail or subway station. Obviously, we do believe that by adding density to areas, the network will come. And yes, it is a gamble, but it is something that we are comfortable with, or else we wouldn't be sitting at this table right now.
Okay, I'll have more questions for staff chair, but that's it. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Brock.
Thanks, Chair. Just aside from the gaps in the transportation infrastructure, a number of safety issues were raised by delegates today and in written correspondence. And I just like to get your response to safety concerns in general. Are there any that you agree with that you would like to flag for this committee to follow up on?
Well, we definitely are a strong advocate of safety. Obviously, we don't want anybody to get hurt. That's quite obvious. From the get-go, we want a sidewalk on this property. We would like to see a proper sidewalk for this kind of arterial road. We did see the preliminary sketches for Carp Road updates or upgrades, sorry. And we do have some reserves on those plans. We find that having a curbside sidewalk is not suitable for that area. In our initial proposal, we did wanted to separate the sidewalk from the road, be able to have a landscape buffer in between the two, introducing bike lanes. And what we've seen so far from the Carp Road upgrade is not to that standard, in our opinion. We will continue to work with staff in the coming months to hopefully get something better than what's proposed currently. And we will be the first one to push forward for that, 100%.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple of comments. I think I'll see if I have a question, but I was interested to listen to the resident there. Let me wrote his name down, Terry Clausen, refer to the Canada North buildings, 28 and 30 stories. You will recall we approved them not that long ago. And that is in the Canada Town Center area, right? Where there's like probably 20 new apartment buildings there, all in that Canada Town Center area. And the argument every time was that, well, you know, there's transit right there. Well, I will tell everybody here on the Transit Commission, that transit is LRT stage 3. How's that coming along? So, I mean, that is the question. Honestly, Miguel, I appreciate that. It does warrant that you say, okay, this many people live here now, maybe then we need that. But these are major infrastructure projects, right? The other is whether it's bus rapid transit or not, like bus rapid transit up March Road. You know, you saw earlier in this meeting, we approved 40 stories along March Road, right? The section that had been 9, we now are saying 40. And so when that happens, well, when will that happen? You know, that actually all those buildings will be built there, then we'll have development charges, then we'll put bus rapid transit unless we get funding from the federal government. So, I mean, these are all these things, you know, I think, you know, Councillor Kitts and I, we make these comments a lot at this committee that the, you know, the chicken and egg infrastructure, you know, building development charges, you know, what do we use for the money to widen these roads, put the bus rapid transit in, you know, these are asks the federal government right now because we can't afford this. And then the question goes back to us is budget time, everybody. You know, how much do you want to increase property taxes to be able to do some of these other infrastructure projects as well, right? So that again falls to us. And do we want to increase property taxes because then that creates other problems? So none of these things, you know, is simple. So on this, you know, I ask this question every time, but if we were to vote against this, and I look at, you know, I will remind you about Stacy Drive as often as I can, you know, a building that we voted against was beside an industrial park, you know, with more than like this is 200 meters to transit. Councillor Gower is saying ours was, you know, 1.3 or something meters walk to get to a bus stop. We voted against it and we couldn't get a planner to argue it in front of the OLT. So, I mean, I feel for the people of Stittsville. I understand this angular plane, you know, this is a lot of density. There isn't necessarily the infrastructure.
Sorry, Kathy, Councillor Curry, do you have a question for the applicant?
My question honestly is to Tim Mark, really my standard question. What would we actually say is the planning rationale to vote against this that would actually be effective?
And I know Mr. Mark has taken note of that question, and when we move to questions to staff, he'll have the opportunity to answer that. Thank you. Anything further? Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is about family units. I see that 3-bedroom units are listed. Is that going to be in the affordable housing? Because the biggest shortage is family housing, and Stittsville is a very family area. I'm hearing about the schools being overcrowded because people want to go there with their kids. There's lots there, but I just want to know if you're setting aside those more affordable housings for family units.
The way the CMHC program is set up is actually perfect for family housing because, as I mentioned, you need to have those 95 units that need to be at 70% of the 30% median income. It's easier to reach that target when you target the larger unit because on a price per square foot, the larger unit end up having a higher rent. So usually these bigger units get discounted the most. So to answer your question, yes, that would target those 3 bedrooms.
That's great. And are you set up for families? Like, is it kid friendly?
We have plenty of amenities. I think is probably one of the projects this committee will see that has the most amenities probably for the last many years and many years to come. We have, I think it's about like 25,000 square feet on the 3rd floor or even 30.
Yeah, there's probably about 25,000. Sorry. I don't know if we can put the presentation because it can actually show you the There's some amenity images that are there. And so one of the big aspects of this particular project was how we created an amenity terrace on top of a parkade to eliminate a lot of surface exposed parking. If you, like right there, you can actually see in that middle zone, that's actually on top of a 2-story parking garage. And so the idea is that that entire terrace will have potential swimming pool, community gardens, patio, barbecue sections, kids parks. Like it really is meant to have a community, an outdoor community for this residence here.
Okay.
I mean, we pride ourselves in our project to give a lot of amenity space. We want to create lifestyle projects where people can actually find themselves living there and not having to walk out, and they can really have all they need right there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Chair. Just as a little added clarity, you were speaking about using some of the commercial space for nonprofit purposes. Is that how I understood that? I just wanted to...
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, perfect. So can I just understand in terms of your financing, does that mean that you're going to be offering a discount on commercial rents to incentivize that type of leaseholder? My caution is that I have had experiences where we promise a certain type of tenant, and of course we cannot control for what the market bears. So before we go down the river of, you know, a certain kind of tenant, how will you incentivize a nonprofit partner there financially?
So what we did in the past for the food bank distribution center, like, and that's back in Montreal, but we're gonna try to replicate the same thing here. Our partner, we actually offer that space for free. And then for the 1,000 square foot for the offices, we usually give them market discount, and you know, it can range anything between 40 and 50% market discount. And since it's a very small space, like it doesn't have a substantial impact on our financials. We have yet to do the legwork on finding those community organization, obviously at this stage, but that's the target.
Okay, well, it sounds to me like you're thinking creatively about your commercial space, and hearing from the delegations about their concerns about the different services and amenities that are accessible. It might be of interest to you to have further conversations with the ward councillor and the community about your layout of that commercial space and the square footage of available spaces, so that it can be accessible and attractive to the types of services that those individuals are meeting. Not to say that I'm not supportive of the idea of a nonprofit partner, but of course it has to be, you know, responding to community need. So there might be a further conversation there that would be worth pursuing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Just my own questions. I want to follow up on what Councillor Johnson was just asking for. The city doesn't have necessarily the legal scope to be able to require as part of site plan the provision of discounted space to a particular type of tenant. Is there an MOU or undertaking or covenant that you're willing to undertake in order to guarantee that?
It's something that we could explore. The thing about those spaces is that it's also tied to the CMHC financing. So we're trying to get as many points as possible on the score grid to actually secure that financing. So there's plenty of incentive for us right there in the financing.
Okay. The incentive is there, but we can't foresee without some sort of additional condition that we can't necessarily put in site plan. So we'll chat further with the vice chair on that. And then the second question, I'm just wondering if Ms. Crozier could pull up the angular plane slide. I believe it was Mr. Meny. Thank you, Kelly. Called into question the accuracy of this. Now, I'm not as hung up on angular plane as the way to achieve transition. I saw what the OLT did on Montreal and Ogilvy. And there are a number of different ways to achieve transition. And I think, you know, even just the buffer that you have on this one is significant. Can you explain how you've calculated this angular plane?
Yeah, of course. Unfortunately, you can't really read it there, but it is in the document and in the design brief as well. So what we've done is we've used the We put it right on the property. We've gone up 11 meters, which is the allowable height. And then from there took the angle at 45 degrees.
And so the 11 meters is the as of right for the, I think it's R1 properties that are in
Yes.
behind. So this does conform to my understanding of how you calculate angular plane. The rear of the adjoining property's property line, go up to maximum height, draw 45 degrees, and I'll take your word for it that that's 45 degrees that we're looking at there without a protractor. Okay. Those were my questions. Are there any further questions, Miguel?
I just took note that you were potentially going to have side discussions about the community space. Just to be clear, that was put on the table by DevMount and it was their initiative. And initially we asked for more firm language in the zoning, but because we don't regulate tenure and things like that, we agreed that we would mention in the staff report. But I don't think you have to worry about DevMount's commitment to that space because they're the ones who've been advocating for it. It wasn't a request from staff or the community. So I wouldn't necessarily want to go down the route of finding a new mechanism to put their feet to the fire. And on the angular plane, as you know, I don't share staff's commitment to the angular plane. I think there's more sophisticated ways to apply transition. And in this case here, you recall that the buildings have a meaningful setback to the rear with the 10 meters, but then the tower is approximately 47 meters from the rear property line, which is a function of the depth of the property. It's considerably better transition than even the Montreal Road run, which, if you recall, was about 35 meters, and a good part of that building was well into the angular plane. Yep, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to let the commitment to that space go. I get that. Sometimes it's nice to put some of those offerings on the table. Clearly the decision that we have to make today does not hinge upon the provision of that space. It's very much a nice to have, but since the commitment's been made, I'd love to make sure that it's followed through on. So let me noodle that a bit more as the meeting continues. I don't see any further questions for you from members. Thank you very much for your presentation today. So members, we now have the opportunity to ask questions of staff. And Vice Chair Gower.
I have a few.
I bet.
I could start anywhere, but I'll start on that 45-degree angular plane. I do think it's important because we're in a transition point now where our official plan allows for up to 40 stories with suitable transition, but we haven't really fully defined transition because we're doing that through our draft zoning bylaw underway. And we do have a community meeting tonight. You're all welcome to join myself and Councillor Curry and Councillor Hubley. But I think the 45-degree angular plane for residents looking in on this, it's a very clear measurement. And I want to ask staff specifically, because a delegation raised it. In measuring or evaluating that angular plane, have you evaluated it just beyond taking the diagram that the applicant submitted? Like, how have you done that measurement or that evaluation independently?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As a 45-degree angular plane, the math is quite simple. So I have done the math. It does comply exactly as proposed by the applicant with the 1.5-story corner projecting through that angular plane. So we are satisfied with their calculation and agree with the calculation from the rear property line at the permitted height of 11 meters. So that's purely calculation. If you just repeat, did you have more question to that as well?
I think I was just looking for an acknowledgement that you have independently verified beyond just taking the diagram that was provided by the applicant.
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier in your presentation, it's not just the 45-degree angular plane that in your view provides transition. It's the setbacks of over 40 meters for both buildings. It's the step downs from the building as they approach the rear of the property, and it's the landscape buffer. So is there anything else that provides transition, or that, yeah, is there anything else that provides transition than those elements?
In addition to what you've just noted, I'd also add that, that the tallest building, the 21-story tower, is furthest away from the adjacent neighborhood zone. So that was another measure in which they provided transition by providing the highest tower furthest away.
Okay. Shadows came up a little bit, less than I expected it would from delegations. Can staff explain how they evaluated the applicant's shadow study and how you determined that this is acceptable from a shadow perspective?
Yes, so in review of the shadow study, we reviewed to ensure that we agree with how they've determined the as of right zoning. And that really is kind of the key measure that really helps us understand what that impact is. So the applicant included an as of right projection of the shadows compared to the proposed, so that we can understand that impact. And through that review, we're satisfied that the impact is minimal. Shadows do move quickly. Shadows do impact in the sense that everybody will experience shadowing at some point of the day. And that's also mitigated by the size of the floor plate, the point tower, et cetera. So we did note that the residential properties on the south side of the proposed development are impacted even in the as of right situation. And then beyond that, like I said, the shadows do move quickly. So we're satisfied with their review and their analysis.
One of the delegations said that the shadows do not conform with our city policy around what is or is not allowable for shadow impact. Is he right? Is he wrong? How does...
When I reviewed it, I did note that I only noted 2 hours where they were impacted because the as of right already does impact. As the delegate did mention, they are closest to the property. So they will experience shadowing even with just a 4-story development that's permitted as of right. So my review was 2 hours. But I think it's also important to note that it is a guideline. It is direction for review. It's not a hard and fast yes or no. And we have to review that in that impact or, that in whole, right, as part of the whole development and our goals for what we're looking for, pursuant to the official plan. And so in that, we've determined that it is appropriate and the impact is minimized.
Okay. The floor plate, usually the maximum is 750 square meters. This one's, I think, 800 square meters. Why does staff believe that's it's acceptable to exceed the 750 square meter mark?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the guidelines do acknowledge that larger floor plates may be considered in suburban locations specifically. And it is staff's position that the proposed 2-tower concept with the varying floor plates and varying heights results in a better site design than the previous proposals that were presented to us.
So providing flexibility on that has benefits or advantages to the overall design?
Yeah, the flexibility of the floor plate allows for overall urban design approach that is appropriate for the layout of the site.
And is it due to the large size of the site that's appropriate, or does that factor in at all?
So, Mr. Chair, I can just add, as my colleague, Ms. Baldwin has said, the site itself and the layout of the site, I would say, yes, the site is very large, right? So it can handle density, which we're seeing here today. So it is a factor of consideration of the size of this site. It's also a factor of the ability to provide separation, both to adjacent properties, transition to the rear to the low-rise community, as well as separation to other developments, so the 12-story on the building. It's also consideration of potential impact on the north side, right? So we have quite a significant right-of-way on Hazeldean. So when you look at all of that together, the impact of a slightly larger floor plate, larger than 750 square meters, is appropriate, or we've determined it is appropriate. And it's also important to remember that, as Ms. Baldwin said, in suburban contexts, we do recognize that, it could be appropriate because we have these larger sites, and that the 750 is just a guideline, and we do have to evaluate it in its context and in the proposal itself.
Okay. Another thing from the staff report is staff are recommending for the community space that there be no additional requirement for extra parking spaces. Can you explain your rationale for that?
Through the chair, that we do recognize that it is a small commercial use that is not expected to generate high parking rates, and do recognize that the official plan does direct staff and council to reduce parking requirements, particularly along corridors, so that we made a recognition based on the official plan policy that and as such have no concerns with the parking reductions for either commercial or residential on this site.
Okay. I want to focus on a couple of big transportation issues. One is the timing of the Carp Road upgrade, which is Carp Road from Hazeldean to the Queensway, including an upgrade of the intersection. My understanding is the timing construction could start as early as 2025, but I'd like staff to clarify what's a realistic timeline for when construction will start on Carp Road. And well, I'll start there. Yeah.
So construction itself would start at earliest mid-2026 or 2027, but it really depends on affordability and what kind of budget we're going to have in the next budget deliberations. So that's as early, and it would probably take 2 years to construct.
Okay, that was going to be my follow-up, the timing. So Carp Road will likely not be finished and upgrade before the first tenants move in here. I'm not asking you to answer that, but if it's 2026 at the earliest, then yeah, that's going to be a tight timeline. What about Hazeldean Road west of Carp Road? Where does that stand in terms of the city's transportation planning for urbanizing that stretch?
As part of the TMP exercise, because it's not identified currently in the Transportation Master Plan of 2013, as part of the TMP exercise, we look at all roadways and requirements and updates like widening, for example, and that will be considered. And I just talked to the TMP team yesterday, and to make sure that it's part of their consideration for where it fits within the future plans.
And the sidewalk between this site and West Ridge Drive on the south side of the street, there's not a recommendation from staff to have the applicant build that. Do we have any ability under the Planning Act or any other policy or legislation to compel the builder to build a sidewalk on the entire south side, not just in front of their property?
Mr. Chair, I see Tim Mark maybe perking his ears up there. But my understanding is that no, as an arterial road, we do not have the ability to require an off-site sidewalk connection.
So we can only require them to build in front of their property. That's
correct.
That's under Planning Act or provincial. Anyone know?
Mr. Chair, I'll go in at this time. This would be a site plan. There's more generous authority granted to a municipality under a plan of subdivision. Even then, it's not unlimited, of course, but there's more generous authority. But on a site plan, the municipality, under Section 41 of the Planning Act, the municipality is really limited to what's taking place within the bounds of the frontage of the property.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I understand the legality. I don't think that's a very satisfying answer to residents. I think the concerns are valid. I'm going to let my colleagues ask questions, but I'll come back on after. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I know that this particular application has been discussed in the media for months now, and I've been paying attention to it and listening to the concerns, and I didn't come in today with any real preconceived idea of how I might vote at the end of this. And I wanted to hear the delegations, and I'm glad that some of these people showed up today. I think by and large, these are some of the best delegations that I've ever actually heard at this committee. They were well researched and well said. And hearing things that I think I hear almost every 2 weeks at this community in terms of, or at this committee rather, lack of services and transit, schools and doctors, and of course infrastructure. So I'm sure when Councillor Curry speaks, she's going to talk about how we share the concerns about the lack of infrastructure and how it's not keeping up with the pace of development along March Road. I don't actually know how far along those developments are, but I'm already seeing people walking down the side of the road to get further into Canada to take transit, seeing major traffic problems in this area already. And again, I don't think we're even close to halfway done through that stretch. I think Miss Lipsey made some good points in terms of what can occur when this happens. You know, people taking risks. I've already seen that, people pulling out onto March Road with very little space between them and the car coming towards them. And again, people walking down a major road with an 80-kilometer-an-hour speed limit. Councillor Kitts makes similar comments, I would say, every 2 weeks at this committee as well, in terms of the development that she's seeing in her ward and the inability for the infrastructure, particularly around transit, to keep pace with that. And I get that we're in a housing crisis, but I do sometimes worry that we're so focused on number of units that we lose focus on ensuring communities are safe and livable, and that the newer developments are respectful of the people who have called Stittsville or Canada or anywhere in Ottawa home for the last few years and already pay taxes here. And so I know there's often considerations, and this sometimes bothers me, although I get that we have to make these considerations about, you know, whether or not proper planning rationale is being followed in terms of our opposition to things and what could potentially happen at a tribunal if it goes there. And I think the people of the city of Ottawa would like us to focus a little more on their concerns. And I hope that we could find ways to address those concerns and if need be, not be afraid to push back and say no and send it to the tribunal, because that's their job. And I think that Mr. Boucher's point about doing what we think is right rather than you know, just rubber stamping things here resonated with me greatly. Anyway, I still haven't really decided how I'm voting on this, but wanted to add those comments to the mix. And then finally, a question, if staff could just comment. I know there's been meetings about this and the conversations continue on how we resolve this issue. What are we doing as a city to ensure that infrastructure keeps pace with development? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Chi. Ms. Chi.
Good afternoon. Sorry, still morning. It's the infrastructure, the planning work. We are ahead of the plans of the transportation master plans, infrastructure master plans. We're doing all of that. Environmental assessment studies are being done. So it's truly a question of funding the projects. A lot of the growth projects are funded through development charges. So we've gone through that exercise. There will be more updates to DCs each time our master plans are updated. And we have to balance that with, you know, the cost of funding new infrastructure versus the cost to each unit for the home buyer. Then there's also, but they're not funded 100%. So there is a tax component. So it's a balancing of the funding sources and what's affordable and how we go forward. So every step of the way, this issue of funding is examined, and we roll out then our master plan projects in accordance with what we have.
Thank you. We'll leave it there. Appreciate it. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just briefly share sort of an AMO experience if I can, because housing is top of list, not just in our caucus, but of all of our membership. And we have very similar concerns that are articulated every time AMO meets. And that is, we have these housing targets. We have some regions with very high growth and high housing targets to achieve. And as we've all said, I think the analogy was chicken and egg. Their housing stagnates because they don't have the infrastructure in place. They don't have the water treatment center. There are no schools. You've got to bus kids completely out of the area. And that continues to be the challenge. But with proper planning, with the various master plans that we're engaged in, that's our blueprint. That's the roadmap to identify those gaps over time. So, Councillor Kelly and others, what guides us? We have to make decisions on what smart planning is and whether this location is appropriate for what's being proposed or not. So a few questions for staff comes up. The angular plane issue and shadowing seems to come up more frequently than it should. Angular plane, is this a guideline or actual policy?
So, Mr. Chair, the urban design guidelines for high-rise buildings are just guidelines, but we do have the official plan policies, which do speak to transition, but it does speak to generally providing transition, right? So transition itself is contextual and has to be evaluated in each specific instance.
Okay, and just for additional clarity, you measure from the abutting property line or from where the residential unit sits?
So the official plan doesn't actually dictate where to measure from. So it does provide that same diagram that is in the urban design guidelines that was referenced. And so there are different ways. It can be measured from the property line. It can be measured from the property line across the street. So you do have to look at the context to understand where it is appropriate. So in this context, we're evaluating the impact immediately to the south. So that would be the residential neighborhood to the south. So it is appropriate to measure it from that rear property line where it abuts that adjacent zone.
But is that how we consistently measure within the city? This came up with the Cleary Avenue. I know 780 baseline with units, but it is at the property line. Is that correct?
I would say.
Chair, I think if I may, there is a distinction in when we're measuring, if we compare this to the 30 Cleary discussion that we had, the 30 Cleary measured from the rear of the residence of the abutting property, but it was at the ground level, I believe, whereas here we're measuring at the as of right height at the property line. And so, there is a slight difference in those two approaches and different contexts that we're dealing with here.
Okay, and just on shadowing, again, Mr. Mark has been asked this many, many times since he's had dark hair as opposed to the current white. But again, just for context, Mr. Mark, you've been asked this many times, but just your comment on shadowing and whether or not the committee takes that into our decision making.
Mr. Chair, there's two aspects to this. I don't have the date in the 19th century memorized, but there has been no prescriptive right to sunlight since sometime in the 1880s. However, there is policy in the official plan with respect to shadowing, and that is something that council can properly take into account.
So do we have a responsibility to mitigate shadowing impacts on abutting properties?
Mr. Chair, my answer to that would be council's responsibility is to take into account official plan policy in respect of shadowing. What I would say, if there were no policy, council would not need to take it into account, but with respect to the policy that exists, yes, that's something for council to take into account.
Okay, thank you. And just the discussion about when there are gaps in various let's just use active transportation infrastructure, in this case, a sidewalk. And the question comes up, who's the responsible party to cover the cost to build, let's just again say a sidewalk? And we've heard that property owner or the proponent is responsible for what I'll just call their property line, and everything off the property line, I guess, would be on the shoulders of the city. But if I'm just thinking of an example of a development that's off a main road and it's just field and there's nothing else, and it's a development and then a road that connects you to the main road. So would we then conclude that if a connecting sidewalk from a development to the main road where there's other sidewalks would not be the responsibility of the proponent, because the only development that's happening in this example is this isolated development. And maybe I'm not as clear, but I always was led to believe that if a development produces a net increase in demand, a net increase in servicing, a net increase in infrastructure, that they would be responsible for covering the costs of that asset. But what I'm hearing and what's being reinforced is only along the property line. Is that my understanding correct in that regard?
Mr. Chair, I would repeat the distinction that I offered earlier today, because I don't want committee to go away not having this distinction in mind. There is much more ample authority under Section 51 of the Planning Act dealing with subdivisions than there is in Section 41, which deals with site plans. Section 41 is rather prescriptive. And so if you were to say, well, suppose it's 3 meters to the intersection, well, that's not likely. Suppose it's 7 meters to the intersection from the property line. Is that something that we might be able to ask under site plan? Possibly. But it is limited, it is prescriptive, it is generally just the frontage. When one is dealing with an application for site plan approval, it's generally just the frontage of the property in question.
Okay, and what makes this current application different than my example is you're already surrounded by an existing community. There are current needs that already exist, so it wouldn't be fair to put on the applicant's shoulders to cover all those costs. It really is what abuts their own property would be their responsibility. The city prioritizes everything else, and then we allocate those funds.
Mr. Chair, for this specific site, what would look to be a gap between their site and the intersection of Carp and Hazeldean. But that sidewalk, that perceived gap, is actually covered in the city's Carp Road widening, which includes the protected intersection. So it will be built, but the timing is hinged on the funding for the road project. And staff are also looking as part of their design exercise to see how they can prioritize this portion first, or as one of the first activities for construction for the entire project. So in this case, we will have it covered, but again, the caveat is the funding for the road project.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Chair.
Hi, Mr. Chair. I certainly have my original question there, but I do want to make one other comment because nobody's really talked about the parking on this site and the bike parking. And, you know, I had to smile at the delegation that talked about her kids in hockey, you know, somebody who had 4 kids in hockey and competitive volleyball all at the same time. I honestly can't imagine. Like, imagine this one night of our lives, if any of these families, like, you know, so we're going to get 4 kids on the bus with their hockey bags out to Ray Friel from Stittsville. Mine was from Canada. Like, think about it. You're going to tell some 4-year-old, well, we're going to ride our bicycles over to the Mille Lacs Center with your hockey bag. Like, this is not realistic. But, you know, you have parking spots, you have bike parking spots. The people who live in Stittsville tend to buy cars for the very reason that they're kid friendly. Their kids all play sports. They need parking spots. So, I mean, the parking spots allocated to this site, I can predict that it will require more parking on the nearby streets. And so one of my questions is there a lot of parking on the nearby streets around this building?
Chair, I'll be honest, I didn't evaluate the parking situation on nearby streets. I can confirm that as an arterial street, there will be no on-street parking for this specific development. I think it's also important to raise, though, that residents of this development will be aware that they may not have a parking space. You know, so that's a standard condition we include within a site plan control application approval. And that also through the site plan process, you know, staff will work with the applicant and developer on transportation demand measures. So, you know, I think we have to remember that choice that that residents are making, and that some residents will make that choice, whether they're coming into Stittsville to live or they're already living there, they're aging in place, they may not feel the need for a car, or that they do acknowledge that they will have to take transit. Thanks.
And thank you for that. I think that is a pretty standard answer, but I think the reality is that people, even like in all the buildings in Canada, they knew what the parking was as well. And then they bought 2 cars and 3 cars, and they, even 2 cars, they don't want to pay for the parking in the building. So they park on the streets. Like, that's the reality. We can say all these things on paper, but the reality is they just say, well, instead of adding another $100 or $200 a month rent for a parking spot in the building, I'll park on the nearby streets. And that's what happens. And then we have that reality. Anyway, there's a lot of reasons why I don't love this, but I'll go to my original questions, Tim, Mark. What would actually be our planning rationale to vote against this?
Mr. Chair, I'm not in a position to identify what the planning rationale would be. With respect, if committee determines that it does not wish to approve it, legal services would work with the moving counselor in order to develop a rationale in time for council based upon reasons that would have been delivered at committee. But as I sit here, I can't provide you with a rationale.
I guess more specifically, my question is, what would actually be effective at the OLT as a planning rationale? You've heard all of the various arguments why people are not, liking various aspects of it, but what is actually passing at the OLT today? The types of rationales that this would, we could use for this one.
I'm not sure, Councillor Curry, if that's a fair question to ask for Mr. Mark. I suspect what he's going to say is that the case for refusal would be built in a situation where we don't agree with the planner's assessment that the proposal meets with the official plan and the provincial policy statement. And it's going to be difficult for Mr. Mark in this instance to make the case on that basis when I assume that he is, he has been consulted on the planning rationale to begin with. It's just, I'm sitting here the same as Mr. Mark, and I try objectively, if I were fighting this, how would I fight it? And I'm just having difficulty coming up with the official plan case that would convince the tribunal.
Well, and I guess that's sort of what I'm getting at. I think you're saying it better than I am. Like, what is the actual case? Like the angular plane? Well, I think staff have said that the angular plane is fine. Like, can you say, well, in the official plan, there should be more parking? Like, I don't see the argument that is credible here for us to vote against this, and then to have a planner that will agree to argue it. So
yeah, I mean, and you can feel free, obviously, to ask our planners, but things like proximity to transit, what does our official plan say about proximity to transit? Keeping in mind that we have a transportation plan that is more important than reality, unfortunately. Once there's a line on a map, that becomes the lens through which we look when we're trying to determine whether or not there is an official plan case. And I think it is, I wouldn't agree with this, but I think it would be legitimate to disagree with the planners on the basis of transition as well. We've tried that once before at Montreal Ogilvy, and I don't see the case, but I think members of this committee, if they were looking for a legitimate official plan case, it would be that this does not meet our official plan policies on transition. But that, I'm struggling to come up with anything on this one.
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. That is exactly how I'm feeling. Like, I guess maybe I'm just because of Stacy Drive. I just feel like, I don't know. I don't see that there's an argument we could make here that would be credible, that we would win at the OLT. That's my problem with this. As many things as I don't like about this, I don't think we have a case. Anyway, thank you.
Vice Chair.
Yeah, I was hoping to wrap up, Chair. So if there's any other questions from committee members.
Can we do comments?
I'll just ask folks to put up their hands. There's a few folks who want to wrap up. I don't see your hand up. I'm gonna take your word for it and that you were
Yeah.
first, please.
Councillor Dudas, go first.
So I just want to understand from staff in terms of the timing of the Carp Road widening, the improvements that are planned there and that extension piece that will improve sections of Hazeldean. I understand that it might not coincide beautifully with the construction of this project, or maybe it will. I know, Frank, you were going to comment on that. But are those improvements that are planned, will they address the majority or quite a lot of the concerns that were aired by residents today in terms of active transportation, congestion on the road, safety? Is that the intention of those improvements?
Well, I can't speak for Hazeldean West because that's an issue that will come up in the Transportation Master Plan update in 2025. But I can speak to what the Carp Road design identifies, and it identifies a connection for a sidewalk to connect from the access of this 6310 over to Carp Road. And Carp over to Carp Road, and Carp Road intersection at Hazeldean will be designed under protected intersection complete street lens. So improvements to the east of their site, I believe, will be handled. But I can't address the concerns west of their site along Hazeldean Road because I do understand it's a rural roadway.
I asked that specifically because, up until very recently, I was the representative of a community that now Councillor Kitts is representing. And when I, traveled this road in anticipation of this item coming to planning, it was so reminiscent of coming through, off an interchange through a rural area into a very built suburban community and knowing the pressures that puts on the community. The difference for me with this is that there is a plan. And although it's not specific to that western portion of that road of Hazeldean, the improvements for Carp Road and for sections of Hazeldean is there, that there is an opportunity within it's not soon enough for residents, and I appreciate that, but it is coming. And in my estimation, it's incumbent upon us as council, because you had mentioned that affordability will be the sticking point, that when this does come to council, whenever it does, and I know that the councillor for the area is a strong advocate for these items being addressed as quickly as possible, that we don't hold it up, that we don't question a road widening, that we pursue this and we put the money towards this project going forward, while also keeping in mind that there might be a need for an expanded element for improving this section. And I know I'm saying that when we're facing, an affordability crisis in terms of our city budget, but, we can't have development and not put in the infrastructure. And we just had this conversation moments ago about chicken and egg situation. The one thing we have control of may not be planning under the Provincial Planning Act. It might not be what development is being proposed before us. It might not be even the timing perfectly, but what it is the budget, and making sure that if we know that there's a large scale density going into certain areas, that we try to do what we can to earmark money to go towards those projects, whether it's immediate or very, very soon, to address those issues. So I was hesitant on this file. I am going to be voting in favor of it. I will do what I can, Councillor Glenn, to make sure that you have the support when it comes time to see that this road work is done to accommodate this density, because I do not think it's fair for us to build projects such as this and then leave folks hanging out to dry when it comes to the infrastructure piece, which we do have control over. I leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much. So I want to echo the comments from other councillors who spoke to how well prepared and thoughtful the delegations were from Stittsville residents today. I really do appreciate that. But I just wanted to speak from the perspective of an urban councillor that's really been the epicenter of a lot of development and a lot of density. We don't have any land left. My ward is 6 kilometers square. And last time I checked, I have something like 40 active development applications. Last summer, I had 200 road construction projects, and those were just city road construction projects. That was not private construction buildings. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, people who live very close together in the urban core are really feeling the pains of intensification and begging other wards to take some of this density. And also, we know not everybody wants to live downtown. They want to, you know, rent an apartment for their children in their neighborhood, be able to age in place, and perhaps rent an apartment when they can no longer take care of a home. We have 400,000 people that are going to need homes in the next 10 years, and they have to go somewhere. So I also want to be clear that, you know, as a member of Transportation Committee, I'm very sensitive to this chicken and egg situation. You know, what comes first, the density or the infrastructure? And again, as a member of the sponsors group for the Transportation Master Plan, I think I agree that we should be thinking very carefully about where density is and how we plan for that in terms of transportation. But it is a little frustrating to be at this committee and to have people come, you know, oppose new housing primarily because of transportation problems. And that just speaks to the way that our city issues can be siloed in different committees. So, you know, I will be supporting this application. It's across the street from a grocery store and park. You know, it's a 200-meter walk from mass transit. You know, we just approved at the former bus station site on Arlington in my ward, more than 1,000 apartments at a site that's a good 30-minute walk from any LRT station. So, you know, with an incredibly low parking ratio. So I understand that this has changed and that this is change that's tough, but it's something we all need to take part in as part of the city. And, you know, density goals are not just this theoretical thing. This is about homes for people who need to live here. We can't deny that we are in the midst of a crisis, and sometimes the solutions appear imperfect, but, you know, it takes years to build a development of this nature. That gives us some runway to start planning the infrastructure that's needed. So I want to thank everyone who came to committee today. I will be supporting this proposal, which I know might be very disappointing to you, but I want you to know that you were heard, and that the work isn't finished to ensure that we have the right infrastructure to match development in our neighborhoods.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. Thought of this question late, so it may have been better posed to the applicant, but there's 3 buildings on this site. Was consideration ever given to phasing the construction of the buildings to allow for time for some of the infrastructure? That I really appreciate Councillor Judas's comments and her questions, but giving some more time for some of that infrastructure to catch up. Do we have the ability to request that, or is it at the full discretion of the developer?
Chair, the ask for the zoning approval that from the application is to grant the you know, the height and the density that's before us today. While on a project of this scale, there is likely to be some phasing included, it isn't something that we would typically require. You know, could we in some form implement provisions, you know, through holding or other mechanisms? You know, it's possible, but it would be atypical. And it is something that is typically, you know, on a project with multiple buildings that we see anyway, as they are, you know, have a practical need to have absorption within, you know, one building before they start construction on another one.
Okay, so I think I'm hearing that that conversation could happen, but is unlikely.
There's a likelihood that phasing will happen anyway. There is some possibility that we could explore it, but it is atypical.
Sorry, I just want to be clear on that, because there's a couple of instances here. If this committee so decided, and then was backed up by council, would we be within our rights to put a holding symbol on the zoning such that the zoning for a portion of the geography doesn't become effective until a building is constructed?
I think that is a mechanism to achieve what the councillor was asking.
Yep.
I cannot speak to whether or not, you know, the applicant could appeal such a holding being placed upon them, and what their, you know, what the basis of that holding would be, and whether we would be successful at the OLT ultimately if they chose to pursue that.
But that is that a motion that somebody could bring today?
yes, it's a motion that a committee member could put forward.
I'm not going to, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that response. I'll hold on that for now, but I think it's a interesting consideration because, as multiple of my colleagues have said, this is a perennial issue in some of these areas that, have significant transportation deficiencies. And just to respond, Councillor Troster, I appreciate what you're saying. I think the challenge here is that, we're seeing a lot of development in the core. We're seeing a lot of development in the suburbs, but there is, a transect of our city that is not taking a lot of development. It's that missing middle, that inside the Greenbelt, outer urban section. And I think our challenge as a city is going to be, how do we make that desirable through the new zoning bylaw, make that make sense? Because, if you look at DC's collected, it's clear which wards are doing the heavy lifting. And there's a lot of pain that comes with that for the residents that live there. So that's, I think, the challenge. Anyways, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Change will come to the bungalow belt. Councillor Tierney.
Great. First of all, thank you very much to the delegations. I like pictures. They really illustrate what you can't see just in black and white on paper. And that is neighborhoods. And that's a big part of why we're elected, is to try to do our very best to represent the constituencies we do. I know we reference especially the Montreal Road and Blair Road in my location. I think that was a high test. I think our staff certainly tried their best. They opposed the application. But at the end of the day, and I heard some comments about the developers get the way. Actually, that's not the case. It's the provincial laws that are set. It's our plan that we present and put forward. And it's about the provincial tribunal that's making those decisions. While we do have a housing crisis, we recognize it. I do have, oddly enough, and some of the largest number of high-rise apartment. If you've driven past Saint Laurent Boulevard, I know media doesn't like doing that, but if you want to come for a drive sometime, in the Searville region, we have many, many towers going up right now. The difference with a lot of the intensification that I fully support is when it abuts properties meters from two-story homes, this becomes a bigger challenge. But at the end of the day, we are very much neutered. We don't have the tools anymore. The discussion of a holding symbol, from what I know, and with further clarification why I wanted support, that of any kind of motion coming forward on that, it can be appealed. It's pretty clear. Intensification is what we're talking about. So on that, there is a substantive cost. Of resource time and court time that has been used, even in the example in my area. So for those reasons, I mean, we really are faced with a question here. We decided for intensification. We decided we're not going to expand and put more roads and put more sewers. And that means building up in areas of land, going up instead of out. And that's what we're facing, the new challenges. We are a very much growing city. I will be supporting the staff recommendation to move forward on this project, but I do think we have to get to our provincial governments. They always remind us we're creatures of the province. We heard it at AMO. Riley's quite correct that we really don't have a dog in this fight anymore. And it's really challenging. Now we're reduced to, a lot of the municipal issues and federal provincial issues. But when it comes to building a city, we're really restricted. We want to obviously keep with our vision. I think our council's been doing a terrific job, great leadership from our planning chair. But many municipalities, 444 across the province, are facing the exact same issues. And hopefully we can find a way to be able to deal with the fact that there's faces to these communities. And yes, I am wrapping it up, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tierney. I'm going to give Glenn the very last word, so I'll just ask some questions now, and I only have one little piece of wrap up. Another piece of clarification around motion that could potentially come from this table would be, could we legitimately put a holding symbol on the zoning pending the completion of a sidewalk for the missing portion to Carp Road? I just want it to be on the table that, you know, we're not utterly without tools. Well, if there were a holding symbol, I could imagine a front end agreement might come into place right quick.
Appealable.
Mr. Chair, there are occasions where a holding symbol to be imposed pending the installation of infrastructure is appropriate. It would seem to me to be a difficult one, however, to justify in this case.
Okay, thank you. There was an assertion, a couple of assertions that caught my attention. I think Mr. Hanna made them early, that the Montreal Road OLT decision offered flexible considerations of transition on the basis of its transit proximity. And I just want to understand whether there is something different about Montreal Ogilvy and its proximity to transit that would lead us to interpret the OLT's decision on flexible approaches to transition differently for Hazeldean. Montreal and Blair, sorry. You got so many of them going.
Chair, I would appreciate the opportunity to review the decision in greater detail before providing you with a fulsome response. I think in this situation, you know, we believe that we have met the 45-degree angular plane. We believe we have met the provisions for transition within the official plan and are not ultimately seeking, you know, additional flexibility beyond that. You know, to speak to the decision for Blair Road, I believe that building was closer to the property line than this one is. And so that it may have been a different set of context, and I apologize, but I would appreciate the opportunity to sort of get into the details of that and refresh my memory of some of those finer points in order to provide you with as clear a response as possible.
Okay, it's not urgent on my part. But if there is a perception out there that it's a different context, it'd be good to be able to explain that to people moving forward. You know, clearly I feel there is lots of transition that's been provided in multiple different ways on this particular one. And then just a quick question, Kimberly, sorry, Ms. Baldwin, were you the planner for Montreal Ogilvy?
I was not.
Blair. You were not, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was corrected on the record, not that it's relevant to very much. And then finally, there was an assertion made again, I think it was Mr. Hanna made it, that there was a development in Robert Grant that was held off due to a lack of infrastructure. Could I just get some precision around what that situation was?
Again, Chair, happy to look into that in greater detail and come back to you with the details on the holding provision that may have been used there.
Okay. Vice Chair Glenn, I think, can provide us a bit of context when he speaks. So the only piece of wrap up I have on this one is, you know, I think it meets with what our official plan says, which makes it difficult to try to refuse. There is, I hear sometimes on the part of the community, that appetite to have this committee make decisions that it knows are going to fail at the OLT. And those are not entirely without consequences. When the politicians across Ontario have been making politically popular decisions not grounded in planning law, that's when we start to see things like Bill 23. For those who were around pre-Bill 23, it was nice to have political control over site plan, right? Politicians across Ontario abused political control over site plan, and the province yanked it away. So, making decisions that we know are the wrong policy decisions will have consequences with a federal and a provincial government that are keen to see homes built. So while it may be tempting to do a politically popular thing, I would ask this committee, as I frequently do, to take a look at this application through the lens of the official plan and the provincial policy statement and determine whether you agree with our staff that it in fact meets those. Vice Chair Gower?
Thanks, Chair. Last word. Do you want me to talk about Robert Grant? We had a 2021 5,000 Robert Grant Avenue. There was an applicant seeking more height because of their proximity to a transit station. The transit station, though, will not happen before 2031 in that location. And so the applicant agreed to a condition to delay construction of about half of the units in the tallest tower until more of Robert Grant Avenue was built, which will likely be around 2029 or so. So we did come up with a solution, different context, but it was related to transportation timing. Yeah. The applicant was supportive of that. I suspect if they weren't, it would have been appealed, and who knows what the outcome. Anyways, I wanted to wrap up. I'll acknowledge, like my colleagues have, the public feedback we've had on this. The individuals who've been here in person, the individuals who've spoken online this morning. Thank you for bringing that extra context to committee. We've had 2 public meetings. One of them had about 300 people attending. We've had hundreds of emails, phone calls, messages about this. There's a petition with over 700 names on the petition. Today, we had 7 people speaking at planning committee. That's more people from Stittsville speaking on planning items than we've had in the entire past 6 years. And we've had some controversial developments. So this is a big deal for Stittsville. Obviously, it's going to be a 21-story building. It will be the tallest in Stittsville if it is built. It is right now the tallest building. It would be the tallest building approved west of Bell's Corners. It would be one of the tallest in Canada. There's some that have been approved and underway. It's a big building. It's a big change. So there is a lot of interest. And I think valid concerns about infrastructure and amenities, and you've heard many of them today. Some of those are municipal issues. Some of them are provincial. The doctor shortage is a huge one. We have thousands of people, so many newcomers coming to our community every year. They are not finding family doctors. We have one walk-in clinic that tends to be open 3 days a week. The Queensway Carleton is far above any anticipated capacity. We have schools that have portables the moment that they open. This is a reality in all over Ottawa, but particularly in the West End, we have a real deficit. Those are provincial responsibilities. Provincial government is telling municipalities to grow. We need them to come to the table with more investment in their responsibilities. I'm going to dissent on this item, but I want to be really clear. I'm not against the apartments. I'm not against the height. It is tall, but it does meet the intent of our official plan. I'm not against the parking reductions. Just a note, it came up earlier. We have an origin destination study from 2022. 31% of apartment dwellers in Stittsville do not own a car. Only 13% of apartment dwellers have 2 or more cars. So that leaves 56% of apartment dwellers with 1 car. So I think the parking reduction is appropriate. I'm happy to see some level of affordability. This is not something we see often to this extent in the suburbs and the variety of housing types. All these planning related things are good. I'm dissenting though to give voice and to acknowledge what we're hearing from the community on this. A lot of it is around the transportation infrastructure. I'd have a lot more comfort if we'd heard from staff today that there was confirmed funding for shovels going in the ground in 2025 for Carp Road. And that's not what we heard today. If we get funding, it could be 2026 or 2027. The timeline on this keeps slipping. It's my number 1 budget priority for this year. It's really a matter of having City Council allocate the budget to make this happen. And it is my top priority. I met with the mayor yesterday, as many of us are this week, on budget priorities. Getting Carp Road upgraded is the number 1 for Stittsville, and I'm going to keep fighting for that. This is a lot of issues around timing. You know, even if we were coming a year from now or a year and a half with our zoning bylaw, which would provide clarity around what transition is. Like, I totally respect where residents are coming from. In the official plan, it says you can do up to 40 stories if they're suitable transition, but we're going to define transition in our zoning bylaw, which is underway. And then we get this application, and there's not a lot to fairly measure it from. So I appreciate this is an issue of timing. The idea of a holding for the tallest building is kind of interesting. Want to totally acknowledge what the chair said. There are consequences to that. But, you know, if we were to put a hold on and I could convince colleagues to approve that, it would take about 6 months to get through appeal. Maybe that aligns a little bit closer with Carp Road. Maybe, you know, win or lose, maybe it's a gamble worth taking. I don't know. So I'm gonna talk to colleagues and our legal staff over the next week and see if that might be one tool we do have to align this better to transportation. That's interesting. And finally, we talked a lot about chickens and eggs, and I want to go back to something I said earlier. The key to getting Carp Road built, the key to improving transit, it's to get the money to do that. We can raise taxes to do that. I don't think that's very popular. We can raise development charges, which we are being raked over the coals by the province and the feds any time we attempt to do that. The other solution would be to access the funding streams that are available through the province and the feds based on housing growth. And we're not going to get those if we reject or stop growth, whether it's at this location or elsewhere. So we're in a real jam on that. And I appreciate what a couple of the delegations said around where development happens and how it happens. But this is the big challenge of this committee and of council right now, is how to direct that growth and how to keep up with the infrastructure stuff that's in our control and items that are in the province and feds control as well. So that's it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Anyone want yeas and nays?
Yeah.
Yeas and nays?
Yeas and nays.
Councillor Brockington,
Yes.
Councillor Curry,
Yes.
Councillor Dudas,
Yes.
Councillor Johnson,
Yes.
Councillor Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Councillor Kelly,
No.
Councillor Kitts,
No.
Councillor Lowe,
Yes.
Councillor Tierney,
Yes.
Councillor Troster,
Yes.
Vice Chair Gower,
No.
Chair Leeper,
Yes.
9 yeas, 3 nays.
Thank you very much, colleagues. So that item carries. Were there any motions on that one? Sorry, I forgot to ask it. There was a technical motion. Did that technical motion, is that carried?
Carried.
Amazing. Colleagues, we have one more item left. There are going to be 3 delegations on it. Can we take 5 minutes, no more? Oh, there's no delegation left?
Jason's.
Oh, okay. Jason doesn't need to speak to the item, or sorry, Mr. McGrath doesn't need to speak to the item if, okay, so we've lost the other public delegations. So Bill 185 and 109 monitoring report, can we carry that? Perfect. In that case, colleagues and friends, we've already dealt with the information previously distributed. Are there any notices of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting? Are there any inquiries? We have no other business. We'll adjourn until our next meeting on Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. That is one single uncontentious item that I am very curious. Sorry, yeah. So we'll take a look at that. Sorry, I'm being told the mic is hot. Like I gotta turn
Thank
the
you,
mic.
Jeff. Have a great one.
Thank you very much, everyone.